Story 1. My sister laughed when she took my office chair. Minutes later, her voice trembled on voicemail. I said calmly, "Did you enjoy Section 7? My father delivered his verdict and the conference room became silent. The company's board members sat around the mahogany table. My sister, Lauren, looked smug next to my father, and I stood at the head of the room presenting my quarterly report. Suspended. I repeated to ensure I had heard right. Until you apologize to your sister for undermining her authority," Dad continued, his voice carrying the tone he employed when he thought a decision had been made. 10 days without pay should allow you to ponder on proper working behavior. Lauren adjusted the fancy blazer she purchased with her expense account and attempted to appear wounded. The endeavor could have been successful if I hadn't spent 28 years learning to read her expressions. Triumph shone through the artificial pain in her eyes. The incident that ignited the circus occurred 5 days prior. Lauren, our head of customer relations, had promised a major account that we could provide a customized software solution in 4 weeks. The actual timeline was at least 12 weeks, as she would have known if she had bothered to confer with me or anyone in the development department I had been running for 6 years. I'd emailed the client with the realistic schedule, copying my father as CEO and Lauren as a courtesy. Professional, simple, and required to avoid a lawsuit when we failed to keep her absurd promise. Lauren stormed into my office, calling it sabotage. Now, here we were with Dad taking her side because he always did. "All right," I said. Everyone appeared surprised by how simple my solution was. Dad was clearly prepared for an argument, having spent the morning mentally rehearsing his ideas about family loyalty and line of command. "That's it." Lauren could not keep the astonishment out of her voice. "You are not going to fight this? You want me suspended? I am suspended. You want an apology? You will get one." I gathered my presentation materials with steady hands. "Is there anything else? Or can I go clean up my desk for the next 10 days? Dad frowned, clearly perturbed by my cooperation. "Well, expect you back on the 18th, ready to move forward professionally." I nodded and went out, ignoring Lauren's happy smile and the board members' uneasy shuffling after witnessing this family drama develop during what should have been a typical business meeting. For the past 6 years, my office had served as my sanctuary. Florida-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland, and the walls displayed my Harvard degrees as well as awards earned by the development department under my direction. One shelf was packed with photos of my staff celebrating new product releases. Another had prototypes of every project I had overseen from conception to completion. I had created something here. During my tenure, the development department tripled in size and revenue for our division surged by 300%. I'd hired great talent, implemented systems that other organizations have since replicated, and fostered a workplace culture in which employees desired to come to work. My father launched Sterling Tech Solutions 35 years ago, growing it from a 2-person operation to a corporation with 250 employees and clients across North America. He'd worked 16-hour days, sacrificed relationships, and thrown everything into making it a success. Then, he delegated growing amounts of control to Lauren, who contributed average ideas and exceptional manipulating abilities. Family dynamics have always been difficult. Lauren was the firstborn, 2 years older than me, and she competed for Dad's attention throughout our upbringing. Every accomplishment I earned was disregarded or reduced. The honor roll became expected rather than commended. Lauren's engagement announcement overshadowed my admittance to Harvard the following week. Mom used to attempt to strike a balance and make sure I understood how important my accomplishments were. She died of a sudden stroke 6 years ago, 3 months after I joined the company. Dad's preference for Lauren grew stronger in the absence of her calming presence. I began moving my personal belongings into boxes, working meticulously through drawers and shelves. My degrees came off the wall first, securely wrapped in bubble wrap. The accolades followed, each signifying late nights, problem-solving sessions, and breakthroughs they weren't. Daniel, my second in command in development, sent me a text message. "What just happened?" Lawrence telling everyone, "You're suspended." I replied back, taking some private time. "You're in charge." That appeared unattainable until, "Trust your intuition." More texts arrived from team members, but I silenced my phone and kept packing. Each item I wrapped felt like I was shedding weight that I hadn't realized was so heavy. The difficulty of continually justifying my decisions. The weariness of showing my expertise to individuals who are determined to question it. The disappointment of seeing my father choose Lauren's ego over the company's welfare. All of this had compounded into a burden that I'd accepted. Emily from my team had sent me 3 messages wondering whether everything was okay. Ryan, one of my greatest developers, was curious if this was truly happening. Even individuals from different departments were contacting out, perplexed by Lauren's happy assertion that I had been dealt with properly. Grapevine had always been efficient, but seeing it operate in real time revealed something I hadn't really appreciated before. Everyone knew they'd witnessed Lauren's incompetence, her taking credit for tasks she hadn't completed, and her tendency of making promises that my staff had to hustle to keep. They had sensed Dad's preference, even if they had never expressed it clearly. My phone rang with a call from Aunt Carol, Mom's sister. She was the only family member aside from Mom who had never observed the dynamics fully. Carol attempted to maintain a relationship with both Lauren and me after Mom's death, but the balance became increasingly difficult. I responded to this one. "Hey, Aunt Carol. Your father just called me and asked if I could talk some sense into you," she continued without explanation. "He seems to think you're having some kind of breakdown. I told him that suspending you for doing your job was probably the stupidest decision he's made in 35 years of business." I was still smiling. How did he take that? About as well as you'd expect. He hung up on me. She sighed. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" "Honestly, I think I'm better than I've been in years. Is that weird?" "Not even a little bit. I watched you try to earn his approval your entire childhood. I watched him dismiss every achievement and excuse every one of Lauren's failures. Your mother and I talked about it constantly. How concerned she was about both of you. You for never being enough and Lauren for never having to be. The validation hit me more than I had anticipated. Mom never told me anything about it. She didn't want you to feel forced to choose between admitting the problem and maintaining your relationship with your father. She was hoped he would figure it out on his own." Carol's voice softened. "She'd be proud of you for walking away. She always said you were stronger than you knew." We talked for another 20 minutes, Carol filling in details regarding talks she had with Mom that I had no idea about. My mother had apparently been documenting the favoritism for years, keeping a journal of how Dad treated Lauren and me differently. She meant to confront him about it later, but the stroke came first. "Do you still have Mom's journals?" I asked. "I do. She asked me to keep them safe. She told me someday you might need to know you weren't imagining things." Carol paused. "Do you want them?" "Yeah, I think I do." After we hung up, I sat in my empty office, reflecting on all the years Mom had quietly watched the imbalance, seen my pain, and recognized the harm being done. She attempted to compensate by becoming my champion, applauding my achievements when Dad refused, and listening to my complaints when I couldn't express them anywhere else. Losing her had removed the only barrier between me and the full extent of Dad's favoritism. The past 6 years without her had been increasingly difficult. Each episode became more distressing as there was no one left to validate my reality. The framed photo of my colleagues from last year's holiday party went into a box. The absurd "World's Okay Boss" mug I'd received as a prank gift was wrapped in tissue paper. Beneath a stack of technical documents, I discovered a card handed to me by the team 2 years ago when we met an impossible deadline. Inside, they'd all left personal messages thanking me for protecting them from unreasonable expectations and pushing for the resources they required. "You never throw us under the bus," Ryan wrote. "Even when it would be easier," Daniel had added. "Best boss I've ever had, you actually listen." Reading through those letters now that the office had been stripped and my work here was coming to an end, I realized I'd created something more precious than Dad probably imagined. Loyalty is earned via respect rather than demanded by hierarchy. A team that trusted me because I continually put their needs before my own. Professional relationships are built on skill and mutual support rather than favoritism and politics. Lauren had the title, the corner office she'd been hoping for, and Dad's unshakable backing. What she had never been able to establish was credibility with the folks who did the actual work. By late afternoon, my office was barren. 5 years of my work experience fit into 4 cardboard boxes and a rolling cart. I expected to be sad or angry, but instead a weird peace had crept over me. Being undervalued your entire life means you ultimately stopped trying to prove your worth to people who refused to see it. I had waited 28 years for Dad to recognize my efforts, admit that I had inherited his work ethic and business intelligence, and perhaps even express his pride in me. Clearly, none of that was occurring. I took out my laptop and launched a new document. I had been composing versions of the resignation letter in my head for months, but it only took me 20 minutes to write. I kept it professional and brief, thanked the organization for the chance, and gave 10 days notice for my contract, which became effective immediately. Then I opened my email and composed a new message. Every board member, all department heads, and a number of major clients were among the recipients. The subject line said, Development Department Documentation and Project Status. I was always cautious about paperwork. Every project included thorough files defining TIMITs, resource allocations, budget considerations, and technical specs. Every team meeting included notes. Every choice was supported by documentation that explained why it was made. I'd also documented every time Lauren made commitments without consulting development, every ridiculous timeline she requested, and every budget she squandered on frivolous things while insisting my team accomplish more with less. Professional paperwork, no personal information, just facts, dates, and email chains. The email took 2 hours to compile. I've attached spreadsheets comparing the revenue generated by development to other departments. Project timelines comparing the predicted completion dates I supplied to the dates Lauren promised clients. Budget analysis show how resources were distributed among divisions. I supplied the email chain from the incident that precipitated my suspension as well as 5 additional similar situations from the previous year in which Lauren made commitments without contacting the teams responsible for carrying them out. One particularly damaging file depicted a project from 8 months ago in which Lauren promised a client a deliverable in 6 weeks. The development team had predicted 16 weeks. Dad had sided with Lauren, saying that we could make her deadline. We completed in 14 weeks, but only because my team worked 60-hour weeks, and I personally funded the overtime expenditures that over budget, taking a salary cut to make the numbers work. The client had been satisfied. Lauren had taken credit for the successful delivery, but no one except my staff realized how much it had cost to make it happen. My finger was hovering above the send button. This would burn bridges, sever my connection with my father, and rule out any hope of reconciliation with Lauren. Everything I established here would be reduced to a cautionary story about family enterprises and ineffective management. I pressed send. The second email was sent to a recruitment business with whom I had previously communicated 3 months earlier when I first considered quitting. They'd approached me about a post directing the technology division at a competitor, but I gently declined due to family loyalty. It's funny how quickly loyalty disappears when it just goes in one direction. Hello, Rachel. I am ready to talk about the potential we discussed in August. If the post is still open, I may begin immediately. The third email was addressed to a lawyer I spoke with last year about contract specifics. Paul, I need to go over the non-compete clause in my job agreement. Can we meet tomorrow morning? I knew what the clause said because I wrote it myself during the company's legal restructuring 4 years ago. It banned me from working for direct competitors for 16 months, but the definition of a direct competitor was limited enough to leave me with many possibilities. The contract also featured elements I insisted on that other employees lacked, such as complete vesting of my stock options regardless of job tenure and a severance payment that kicked in under certain conditions. Being suspended without cause qualifies. By 6 o'clock, my office was empty and my car was full. I took one final look at the space that had been mine. Then I went away without looking back. The house I bought 3 years ago was in a peaceful community about 20 minutes from the office. Small by executive standards, but mine, paid for with money I earned rather than inherited. The payment was affordable, the garden was tranquil, and the neighbors were pleasant without being bothersome. I carried the boxes inside, drank a large glass of wine, and sat on the couch with my laptop. The responses to my documentation email have begun to arrive. The first came from Michael Brooks, the company's lead attorney. "Call me immediately," said board member Thomas Reed. "We need to discuss this information. Can you come in tomorrow?" 3 clients copied my email to their account managers asking about project timelines. 2 of them expressly expressed worries about commitments Lauren had made. Daniel from development, "Holy, is this real? Everyone's freaking out." I didn't answer to any of them. Instead, I opened a bottle of better wine and ordered some Thai food, feeling lighter than I have in years. The phone rang 47 times that evening. Dad called 12 times. Lauren dialed number 8. Michael Brooks called every 30 minutes like clockwork. I let them all go to voicemail. The text became increasingly frenzied. Dad's first voicemail was irate, asking that I call him back soon and accusing me of being unprofessional. His second question was perplexing, asking what I felt I was accomplishing. The third was almost imploring, stating that we needed to discuss this sensibly. Lauren's messages resulted in threats. She accused me of attempting to damage the company, being envious, and betraying the family. Her final voicemail was filled with sobs, stating that I was ruining all Dad created. The irony was almost humorous. I'd spent 6 years helping Dad build something, but Lauren had spent the same time relying on his reputation and making mistakes for others to clean up. Michael Brooks' words were more measured, but more urgent. The legal consequences of the documents I'd supplied appeared to have become clear, and he wanted to talk about my objectives. That night, I got the best sleep I'd had in months. The morning came with prolonged silence from me and continued chaos from everyone else. The calls had expanded into text messages, emails, and even a visit from my father's secretary, who asked me to contact the office. I replied with one group text to Dad, Lauren, and Michael. "I'll be in at 9 o'clock to collect my final belongings and submit formal paperwork. No discussion is required." Rachel from the recruitment business called at 7:30. "The position is still open, and after seeing your portfolio, they want to fast-track the interview process. Can you meet with the CEO this afternoon?" "Absolutely." Paul, my lawyer, made the second call. "Your non-compete is narrower than I remembered. You have options. Come by at 11 o'clock and we'll discuss strategy." "No problem." I dressed carefully for the office, wearing a navy suit that exuded confidence without violence. Professional, composed, and eager to close this chapter neatly. The parking lot was fuller than normal at 8:30 a.m. Apparently, word had spread, and people wanted to see what happened next. I strolled through the foyer, head held high, carrying a leather portfolio with my resignation letter and numerous other documents Paul had produced after I texted him about the situation last night. The executive floor was chaotic. Assistants crowded in corners, murmuring. Department heads stood at doorways, appearing anxious. Everyone seemed to be expecting an explosion. My former office door was open, and I could see Lauren seated at my desk, going through the drawers I'd already emptied. When I approached, she looked up, her expression changing from frustration to rage. "You had no right to send that email," she added, getting up so rapidly that my former chair tumbled backward. "You've made me look incompetent in front of everyone." "The documentation speaks for itself," I said quietly without entering the office. "I merely gave information on project schedules and resource allocation. If that makes you appear incompetent, maybe the problem isn't with my email." Her face flushed scarlet. "Dad's going to fire you for this. You've destroyed any chance of coming back." "I'm not coming back," I said, holding up my portfolio. "I'm here to make it official." Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Dad appeared with Michael Brooks close behind him. My father appeared to have aged 5 years overnight with his face drawn and his suit rumpled in ways I had never seen before. "My office now," he said. He turned without waiting for a reply. "Actually, the conference room would be more appropriate," Michael Brooks explained gently. "This has moved beyond family matters." The identical conference room where I was suspended yesterday suddenly had a completely different vibe. The board members were not present, but Michael had brought along a paralegal who set up a laptop to record the events. "Before we begin," Michael cautiously stated, I need to clarify that this meeting is being documented for company policy regarding employment matters. Dad appeared to want to fight, but Michael's gaze stopped him. My father might run the company, but smart executives listen to their lawyers during potential legal situations. I replied, sliding the letter across the table to my father. I'm resigning effective immediately, per Section 7 of my employment contract. Suspension without documented cause triggers the severance provision. I'm also exercising my stock options per Section 12, which allows immediate vesting upon voluntary departure following disciplinary action deemed inappropriate by outside counsel. He had clearly read my contract and was aware of the specific sections I was addressing. You wrote those provisions yourself during the restructuring, Dad explained slowly, a realization dawning on his face. I did. At the time, you called me paranoid for including them. Turns out I was just prepared. Lauren had followed us to the conference room and is now standing in the doorway. This is blackmail. You're trying to extort the company. Exercising contractual rights is extortion? Michael inquired gently. These are provisions she negotiated in good faith 4 years ago, and the company agreed to them. How much? Dad's voice had become flat, the tone he used to calculate company losses. The severance package is 5-month salary. The stock options are currently valued at approximately $400,000 based on yesterday's evaluation. I kept my voice level and professional. I'll also need my complete personnel file, documentation of all projects I led, and references from the 3 board members who served on the development of her site committee. And if we refuse? Lauren's fists were tightly clasped. Then I refer you to Section 19, which outlines the dispute resolution process. It involves arbitration, which would be expensive, time-consuming, and public. I saw my dad's gaze. I'd prefer to handle this cleanly. I've already secured another position. I'm not interested in dragging this out or causing additional damage to the company. Additional damage? Dad asked, his voice rising. You sent confidential information to clients and board members. You've undermined your sister's credibility. You violated about a dozen policies regarding information disclosure. Actually, Michael abruptly responded. The information she shared was project internal communications. Nothing confidential, nothing documentation and proprietary. Nothing that violates her contract or company policy. I've reviewed everything she sent. It's all factual reporting of project statuses and business decisions. The paralegal was silently typing, recording every word of the talk. Why? Dad eventually asked, and for the first time his tone was fatigued rather than furious. Why would you blow up everything like this? You suspended me for doing my job. You sided with Lauren when she made promises she couldn't keep, and you blamed me for being honest about realistic timelines. I kept my voice calm, refusing to allow emotion enter. Yesterday wasn't the first time, Dad. It was just the final time. So, you sabotaged the company. I documented reality. If reality is damaging, maybe the problem isn't with my documentation. Lauren sounded disgusted. You're just mad because Dad gave me a leadership position. You've always been jealous that I'm older, that I got to work with him first, that he trusts me more. I couldn't hold back my laughter. Trust. He trusts you to make promises you can't keep. He trusts you to take credit for other people's work. He trusts you to prioritize your ego over the company's success. That's enough, Dad exclaimed forcefully. You're right. It's enough. I stood, gathered my portfolio. Michael, I'll expect the paperwork for the severance and stock options by the end of business today. You have my lawyer's contact information. Wait. Dad's hand rose, a gesture that had always indicated stop, listen, obey. We can work this out. Take a few weeks to cool down and we'll discuss how to move forward. There is no moving forward. Not here. I approached the entrance and hesitated. You built something incredible, Dad. Sterling Tech was everything you dreamed it could be. You should probably figure out how to keep it that way instead of letting it crumble because you can't admit your favorite child isn't qualified for the role you gave her. Lauren's cheeks turned pale. How dare you? The Hamilton project launches in 5 weeks, I remarked, turning back to face them. It's the biggest contract the company's ever landed. Development has been working on it for 8 months. Daniel Kim is leading the team and he's brilliant, but he needs support from management who understands technical realities. I glanced straight at my father. Lauren told the client that they may have additional features beyond the scope of the initial project. These enhancements would necessitate another 5 months of development and double the present budget. The client believes they would receive them in 6 weeks because that is what she told them. Michael Brooks' face became much pallid than Lawrence's. The data is all on the shared drive, including Hamilton project scope specifications, timeline analyses, resource requirements, and an email exchange in which Lauren made promises without consulting development. I altered my portfolio. You can fire Daniel for telling you the same truth I did, or you can fix the situation before it turns into a lawsuit. It's your choice. I walked out while they were still processing that. The elevator journey down seemed strange. I'd been working in this building for 6 years, traversed these hallways hundreds of times, created relationships and projects, and had a career I was proud of. Everything ended because I revealed the truth and refused to apologize. My desk had already been emptied, but I paused at development on my way out. The team was gathered around Daniel's office, evidently having witnessed enough drama to put together what was going on. "You're really leaving?" Emily, one of my senior developers, seemed stunned. "I am, but you're in very good hands." I caught Daniel's glance. "Trust yourself. You know what you're doing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." "The Hamilton project," he began, "is thoroughly documented. Stand firm on the timeline and don't let them push you into making promises you can't keep." I addressed the entire crew. "You're the best developers I've ever worked with. You built something incredible here. Don't let anyone diminish or take credit for your efforts." There were tears, hugs, and promises to remain in touch. I meant every assurance I gave them, but I also realized that going out that door meant cutting most of these ties. People would feel torn between allegiance to me and loyalty to the organization. Most people would prefer the firm because that's where their paychecks came from. The lobby seemed like a challenge. Employees I'd worked with for years watched me go. Some with sorrow, others with curiosity, and a few with hardly veiled pleasure at witnessing executive drama. I got to my car before the shaking began. Adrenaline had gotten me through the confrontation, but now the reality of what I had done hit me. I resigned my work, severed ties with my family, ruined my connection with my father, and promised never to talk to my sister again. Rachel from the recruitment business texted me, and my smartphone chimed. "The CEO wants to meet with you at 2. Send me your portfolio." I sent her the paperwork file I supplied yesterday. Sends the internal email chains, project summaries, development achievements, revenue growth, and team leadership examples. My career was reduced to a PDF that strangers could analyze to determine whether I was worth their time. Paul the lawyer called as I was driving out of the parking lot. "Michael Brooks just contacted me. They want to negotiate." "Nothing to negotiate. The contract is clear. They're worried about the Hamilton project. Apparently, your assessment about the scope creep was accurate, and they're facing a potential lawsuit if they can't deliver what was promised. Not my problem anymore. They want you to consult through the project completion. Premium rate, flexible schedule, no direct reporting to family members." I was about to giggle. "So, they want me to fix Lauren's mess while she takes credit for it. They want you to prevent a 7-figure lawsuit. The offer is compelling." "The answer is no." Paul was silent for a moment. "You're sure? This could be a bridge back if you change your mind later." "I don't want a bridge back. I want out." "Then I'll handle the severance negotiation. They'll probably try to reduce the stock option valuation, but we have documentation showing the accurate assessment." The day went by quickly. Meet with Rachel and her customer. Discussing the new role. Negotiating a salary and benefits package that exceeded my previous earnings at Sterling Tech Tour their facilities. Introduction to the team that I would be directing. Conversation about the vision and growth strategy. By 5 o'clock, I had received an official offer letter with a 2-week start date. The severance paperwork had arrived at Paul's office. By 6 o'clock, Michael had added a confidentiality agreement that prohibited me from mentioning the reasons for my leaving. Paul returned a new version that would prevent the company from denigrating me to potential employers or clients. They reached an agreement by 8 o'clock. The stock options were transferred before the end of business the next day. $400,000 was placed into my account. 6 years of accumulating equity was suddenly liquidated. With the severance package, I had enough financial buffer to take my time adjusting to the new role without stress. Dad called once more that week. I let it go to voicemail. His message was brief. "I don't understand why you're throwing everything away. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable." I removed it without replying. The Hamilton project collapsed just as I predicted. 3 weeks after I left, the client learned that the things Lauren had promised were not attainable within the initial timetable. They threatened legal action. Sterling Tech had to negotiate a settlement that included a partial refund and a 6-month extension of the deadline. Daniel called me amid the crisis and asked for advice. I talked him through the technical solutions, assisted him in preparing a presentation for the client, and guided him through unpleasant meetings with management. He handled it well, but the harm to Sterling Tech's reputation had already occurred. 2 board members have resigned. 3 clients transferred their business to competitors. The company's valuation decreased by 18%. Lauren was relegated from customer relations to special projects, a meaningless term that kept her on the payroll without granting her ability to make promises. Dad engaged an outside consultant to help revamp the management team. The consultant's report appears to include critical appraisals of nepotistic hiring practices and insufficient accountability mechanisms. I learned about this through professional networks and former colleagues who reached out despite the obvious awkwardness. The shot and Freya should have been rewarding, but instead I felt sad. Sterling Tech had been something exceptional, and seeing it falter felt like losing a love that should have succeeded, but never did. My new position exceeded my expectations. The team was talented. The corporate leadership really listened to technical assessments, and nobody expected me to clean up the damage left by incompetent family members. 6 months in, we had launched 2 key products and signed contracts with 4 Fortune 500 businesses. I purchased a larger home, adopted a puppy, and began dating someone who worked in a completely different profession and had no link to technology or family turmoil. Life progressed in ways that seemed healthy and sustainable. Dad paid an unexpected visit to my house a year after I graduated from Sterling Tech. He seemed older, smaller, and degraded in ways unrelated to physical size. "Can I come in?" he inquired. When I opened the door, I contemplated saying no, but curiosity won. "Sure." We sat in my living room, awkward stillness between us. My dog, Cooper, a rescue mongrel, looked at Dad suspiciously before lying at my feet. "The company's struggling," Dad finally remarked. "We lost 2 more major clients last month. Revenue is down 30% from when you left." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" He stared squarely at me for the first time. "You destroyed everything I built." "No, Dad. I documented what was already happening. You destroyed it by refusing to see reality. Lauren made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. She made mistakes repeatedly, and you enabled her every time. You chose protecting her ego over protecting your company." He was silent for a long time. "She's my daughter. So am I." The words hung in the air between us, conveying weight that neither of us had recognized previously. "I know." His voice cracked slightly. "Your mother used to tell me I was too hard on you, too easy on Lauren. I thought she was imagining things, seeing favoritism that wasn't there. It was there. I know that now." He wiped his face tiredly. The consultant's report was illuminating. "Apparently, I've been displaying systematic bias favoring the elder daughter while holding the younger to unrealistic standards. Her exact words sound accurate. I came here to ask if you'd consider coming back. Not to your old position. As COO, full authority over operations, seat on the board, equity stake that would make you a major shareholder." The offer hovered between us, intriguing in ways I hadn't anticipated. My father's company, the legacy he left behind, the chance to right the wrongs. "No." Dad's face fell. "Just like that? You won't even consider it?" I don't need to consider it. I have a position I love. Working with people who respect my expertise, building something new. Why would I go back to constantly proving my worth to people who've already decided I don't have any? Because it's family. Family should be the place where you don't have to prove anything. Dad, family should be the people who see your value even when you mess up. You gave that unconditional acceptance to Lauren, but you never gave it to me. He remained quiet, staring at his hands. I failed you. Yes, you did. Is there any way to fix that? I gave it some serious thought, hoping to find a genuine solution. I don't know. Maybe eventually, but not by offering me a job to save your company. If you want a relationship with me, it can't be transactional. What would it look like if it wasn't transactional? It would look like you acknowledging what happened without trying to justify it. It would look like you respecting my decisions even when they disappoint you. It would look like building something new instead of trying to resurrect something that's already dead. Dad nodded slowly. That sounds hard. Most worthwhile things are. He stood to leave, stopping at the door. For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've accomplished in your new position. I've heard good things about the work you're doing. Thank you. The words felt insufficient yet real. Can I call you sometime? Not about business. Just to talk. Maybe. We'll see. He walked away and I closed the door behind him, leaning against it while Cooper leaned into my knees for silent comfort. The conversation should have ended, but it felt more like a beginning. Not necessarily reconciliation, but the prospect of something new based on honesty rather than obligation. Lauren never reached out. I learned through various routes that she had left Sterling Tech and went to California. Supposedly, she worked in real estate where her capacity to make optimistic promises could be beneficial. Sterling Tech continued to struggle but eventually stabilized as a smaller, more focused corporation. Dad hired expert management and delegated responsibility for day-to-day operations. The corporation would never achieve the heights it once did, but it would survive. My career grew in ways I had never believed possible. 3 years after leaving Sterling Tech, I was hired to oversee innovation strategy for a major technology company with a global presence. 5 years later, I started my own consulting firm focusing on assisting family businesses with succession planning and management changes. The irony was not lost on me that I became an expert in the very factors that had wrecked my connection with my own family business. Dad and I communicated periodically, painstakingly constructing something resembling a connection. We had dinner every few months, and our chats were safe from work, focusing on books, current affairs, and his reluctant attempts at retirement pastimes. He never apologized verbally, but his actions demonstrated progress. He came to my wedding 3 years after our living room talk, escorting me down the aisle and giving a toast that acknowledged his mistakes as a father without making the day about him. He sent birthday cards with handwritten comments rather than generic signatures. He inquired about my life with real curiosity rather than seeking opportunities to provide counsel. It wasn't the relationship I desired as a youngster, but it was genuine and based on acceptance rather than expectations. Looking back, my suspension was the finest thing that could have happened to me. It prompted a confrontation that I had been dreading for years, pushed me out of a devalued situation and onto prospects for growth. The expense was substantial. Family relationships have shattered. A job that I had invested in but had abandoned was undoubtedly sacrificed for risk. But on the other side of that upheaval was independence, achievement, and the tremendous satisfaction that comes from not having to apologize for taking up space. Sometimes the most spectacular retaliation is just refusing to play the game anymore. Walking away does not mean giving up. It's acknowledging that your involvement in someone else's tale isn't necessary for you to have your own captivating story. My father wanted me to apologize in order to maintain peace and appearances. Instead, I chose honesty and accountability, even if it meant losing everything I had achieved with his company. The vacant desk and resignation letter symbolized more than just quitting a job. They symbolized choosing myself, respecting my expertise, and demanding respect rather than begging for scraps of praise. The lawyer's pallid expression and Dad's dying smile were not about company drama or familial treachery. They were about people finally seeing reality after years of denying to do so. I did not ruin Sterling Tech. I just ceased shielding it from the effects of its own malfunction. The company's difficulties after my departure were neither my obligation to avert nor my failure to accept. They were the natural result of poor management, cronyism, and a failure to put expertise over comfort. My sister smirked that morning because she believed she had won. She'd suspended me, showed her power over Dad, and put me in my place despite years of competence and accomplishments she couldn't equal. Victory, however, is not determined by who is suspended or favored. It's about who lives a life they're proud of, who surrounds themselves with others who recognize their worth, and who achieves success without undermining others. I got it now. Career I enjoy. Relationships built on mutual respect. A life in which my accomplishments speak for themselves rather than being continually compared to someone else's comfort. That is the real conclusion to this narrative. Not the dramatic departure, the company's troubles, or even the shaky reconciliation with my father. The ending shows me 5 years later sitting in my own office with my own team, doing something significant without continually looking over my shoulder for approval that would never come. Sometimes you do not receive the apologies you deserve. People who should appreciate your worth may never do so. Sometimes family represents sorrow rather than support. But you always get to decide what happens next. You can continue to struggle for recognition from people who refuse to give it to you, or you can channel that energy into creating something new with people who already see your potential. I selected the latter and have never regretted. Now on to the next story. Story 2. My father mocked me for driving trucks. 28 out of 30 raised their hands to exile me. Grandpa said nothing until he rewrote the will on the spot. Hello everyone. My name is Nolan. I am 32 years old. I reside in a house in the Chicago suburbs with my wife Ivy and our daughter Hazel. We currently manage a modest trucking firm with a fleet of 10 trucks. From the outside, people perceive our lives as successful, as if we have worked things out. But to be honest, this property and the business we own now are not the result of my efforts alone. I was a long-haul truck driver earning roughly $4,000 each month after taxes. My wife Ivy worked as a sales assistant for a fashion brand, but her income was inconsistent and insufficient to support us. Life was rough. We were renting a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a less-than-safe neighborhood of Chicago, and the rent alone ate up about half of my monthly paycheck. We'd tally every dollar at the end of each month to ensure we had enough money to care for Hazel. I remember traveling 14 hours a day from Chicago to Texas and back to make a few hundred in overtime. I'd get home at 2 or 3 a.m., exhausted and ready to collapse into bed, but I had to get up again by 6 a.m. to prepare for the next journey. Meanwhile, Ivy worked at a fashion store with a modest base wage and was paid primarily through sales commissions. When business was slow, she earned only $1,800 per month. So we frequently had to borrow money. Even for Hazel's 5th birthday, we could only throw a little party at home with a few grocery store cupcakes and some inexpensive gifts. Seeing her smile so brilliantly at such small things both warmed and hurt my heart. Everything began to alter after Christmas in 2023. Strangely enough, the life I have today is largely due to my parents and family and how they look down on me. I wouldn't be where I am today if not for their judgment. To help you comprehend what I went through, I'll take you back to the day I received a phone call from my grandfather 1 week before Christmas. That day, I was returning to Chicago after 3 days of moving furniture for a firm. When I saw Grandpa on my screen, I quickly responded via Bluetooth. His soothing voice filled the interior of my truck, and for a little moment, I felt less alone on that long length of roadway. After asking how I was doing and how work had been, he remarked in that kind tone, "Nolan, next Sunday is Christmas. Bring Ivy and Hazel over for dinner. 7 o'clock. I miss Hazel so much." Hearing his caring voice brought me solace after all those grueling days on the road. I promised him we would be there and hung up the phone. My grandfather ever was 78 years old that year. Yet he was as smart as ever. He enjoyed hosting a family meal at his home every few years to bring everyone together. He has 4 boys. My father, Victor, was the oldest, followed by 3 uncles, Warren, Edgar, and Silas. Uncle Warren was a show-off. He worked as a branch manager for an insurance business and never missed an opportunity to talk about the million-dollar contracts he had just secured. Every time he saw me, he asked me a cocky question. "Still driving trucks? Nolan, when are you going to get a real job?" Then there was Uncle Edgar. Quieter, but his eyes were constantly filled with disdain. He managed a tiny restaurant and had a habit of looking people up and down and shaking his head as if he could judge someone's worth based just on their clothing. But my father, Victor, was the worst of them all. Being the oldest, he felt himself as protecting the family name and behaved as if he had the authority to condemn everyone else. He managed a tiny construction company and enjoyed bragging about his achievements, even though they were all modest jobs. The hardest part was that he was ashamed of me. Every time someone inquired about me, he'd reply, "Let's not talk about him. His truck driving embarrasses me." Then he'd give me this hurt look as if I'd brought dishonor to the entire family. He even shouted it directly to my face once. "You driving a truck? You're an embarrassment. I can't show my face to my friends." When asked what I did for a job at family gatherings, he either avoided the issue or changed the subject to brag about Trent, his golden child. Uncle Silas was the only one who treated me with decency. He was a grade school teacher with a low salary who always appreciated others. He once said to me, "Your job doesn't define you. You're supporting your family with your two hands, and that's something to be proud of." Uncle Silas was the only one of Grandpa's sons who I actually liked. I didn't like Warren, Edgar, or especially my father. To be honest, I despised them. But I chose to attend the Christmas dinner because Grandpa had asked. I had no idea that accepting that offer would drastically change my life. That evening after supper, I informed Ivy and Hazel that we would be spending Christmas at Grandpa Everett's home. Hazel, who was just 6 at the time, wrapped her arms around me excitedly, asking, "So, I'm finally going to meet Great-Grandpa Everett, right, Daddy?" Seeing her joy, I smiled and replied, "That's right. He said he misses you a lot." Hazel dashed over to Ivy, holding her tightly and screaming, "Mommy, I'm going to draw a beautiful picture to give him." Watching her seem so enthusiastic, I hope she had a memorable Christmas that year. Ivy stared at me with concern in her eyes as Hazel dashed off to her room to begin drawing. She approached, leaned in, and murmured gently, "Are you sure we should go?" I understood exactly what she meant. Every time we went to one of those family dinners, I'd come home heavy, withdrawn, and mute for days. After a few seconds, I sat down on the couch and said, "I honestly don't know, but it's Grandpa's invitation. We can't say no." Ivy sat next to me, softly grasped my hand, and said, "You know, I'm not afraid of what they'll say about us. I'm just concerned about Hazel." Her words struck me hard. I had also considered that. After over a minute of silence, I eventually told her, "Maybe we should just stay for a little while. Wish Grandpa a Merry Christmas. Then leave early." Ivy nodded silently. She didn't say another word. Over the next 3 days, I was torn. Part of me longed to visit Grandpa, the one person in my family who had ever shown me pure love. But another part of me dreaded being in the same room as my father and uncles, dealing with their criticism, especially in front of my wife and daughter. The day before the party, I saw Hazel place her sketch into a small gift bag while continuously asking about her great-grandfather. That was when I made up my mind. We were heading to a party. Whatever occurred, I would defend my daughter and ensure that no one hurt her with their remarks. We drove from Chicago to Rockford around 4 p.m. on Christmas Day in our old automobile. We drove for over 2 hours. Throughout the voyage, Hazel kept raving about the drawing she'd done with Ivy's aid. She was quite excited. "Daddy, I drew Great-Grandpa smiling, and there's a Christmas tree, too." Just before turning onto the familiar road to Grandpa's house, we made a quick detour at the bakery to get some apple pie, his favorite. We arrived around 6 o'clock. Many automobiles were parked in front, including my parents' Accord and my younger brother Trent's shiny new Civic. I imagined they came early to brag about their accomplishments before I arrived. After finding a parking spot toward the end of the block, we walked to the house. The gate was not closed because it was Christmas and the party was in full throttle, so we walked straight in. Trent and I ran into each other just as we arrived at the front entrance. He was standing nearby, a beer in hand. He looked me over and said sarcastically, "Well, look who decided to show up. Isn't that my big brother? The truck driver." His remark stung, but I did not say anything. I just continued walking. Ivy gripped my hand fiercely, and Hazel trailed behind us, oblivious. When we entered the living room, I was surprised by how many people were present. Nearly 28 people were talking and laughing loudly. In addition to my parents, I saw the families of Uncle Warren, Uncle Edgar, and Uncle Silas, who were all present. There were also some extended relatives such as Aunt Miriam and Uncle Clyde, as well as a few unknown faces which I imagined were their children or grandchildren. It had been a long time since I had seen most of them. When I stepped in, Uncle Silas greeted me with genuine sincerity. "Nolan, you're late. Traffic?" I said politely, "Yes, Uncle. The roads were a little busy today." He offered me a warm smile and said, "Go ahead and find a seat for your family. Grandpa will be out any minute." Uncle Silas's act of goodwill moved me deeply. He was not my father, yet he always made me feel more loved than my biological father ever did. Honestly, there were times when I wished my father could be half as nice as Uncle Silas, but I knew that would never happen. As I searched for a seat for us, I could feel the gaze on us. Some folks nodded and smiled graciously, but I could tell that others glanced at us with thinly veiled scorn. What I didn't realize then was that my family will be asked to leave the celebration in just a few minutes. As Ivy, Hazel, and I were seeking for a spot to sit, a sharp voice pierced through the background noise, paralyzing the room. It was my father, Victor. He stood up from a brown leather chair, looked at me with a chilly, deadpan expression, and stated, "In this house, seats are for people who've made something of themselves." My heart skips a beat. My face flushed, heated, and blood rushed upwards. But I forced myself to remain cool, asking, "What do you mean by that, Dad?" Trent moved in from behind, his voice full of hatred. "It means losers like you don't belong here." It felt like someone slapped me in the face right in front of everyone. I looked over at Ivy, who was hugging Hazel tightly. Her face had turned pale from astonishment. Then came sluggish mocking claps from the left side of the room. Uncle Warren was seated on the sofa with a smug expression. After a few mocking claps, he remarked with a disdainful voice, "Trent is correct. This room is full of achievers. Are you still planning on driving trucks for the rest of your life?" Before I could react, Uncle Edgar leaped in. His words cut like a dagger. "Honestly, we're all a little embarrassed whenever someone asks what you do. My own family insulted me repeatedly. I felt my cool slipping. It felt like being in the center of a hostile circle, surrounded by people who considered me as nothing more than an ugly. I looked down and noticed Hazel trembling and grasping Ivy's leg. Her large, innocent eyes were perplexed. She could not understand why everyone was so rude to her father. Just as I was going to speak up and defend myself, Uncle Silas stood up from his seat in the corner of the room. He looked around at everyone, his eyes keen and hard, and stated loudly and clearly, "That's enough. It's Christmas. For God's sake." His voice sliced through the tension like a razor. For a little moment, I felt a sense of comfort, like if someone had reached out a hand to me when I was drowning. But the storm was not over. I could feel it. The silence that followed was deep and almost stifling. The entire room felt like a wire pulled too tight, about to snap. After Uncle Silas spoke, everyone exchanged nervous glances in the silence. Slow, steady footfalls sounded from the corridor. Grandpa stepped out, his demeanor serious, but with the customary serenity he was known for. He searched the room before raising his voice. "Silas, that's enough. They're right." His comments struck me like a bomb in my skull. I could not believe what I just heard. Grandpa, the only person I still trusted in this family, agreed with them, siding with the people who had recently insulted me. Several seconds elapsed. He then turned to face me, his eyes filled with what appeared to be sympathy. There was also something else in there, something I couldn't fully understand. He returned his gaze to the rest of the room and stated, "We'll take a vote. If you want Nolan out of this party, raise your hand. The room plunged into a dreadful quiet. Some folks looked about, puzzled or unsure. Others looked nearly ecstatic about the suggestion. Uncle Silas stepped up, his face flushed with fury, and asked, "Are you serious, Dad?" Grandpa stared him straight in the eyes and stated, "I'm not joking." That moment seemed like the world was crashing around me. The air in the room became heavy and everyone appeared to hold their breath, waiting for the unfathomable vote to begin. A few seconds went by. My father, Victor, raised a hard hand. He locked eyes with me as he did, his countenance icy and unwavering, as if he had just won a long-awaited battle. Trent was next. He lifted his hand with a malicious sneer. He appeared to be enjoying himself, as if he had been looking forward to this moment for years. Then followed Uncle Edgar and Uncle Warren, who raised their hands virtually simultaneously. Warren nodded, apparently delighted with himself, while Edgar maintained a serious attitude as if he were carrying out some noble task. Their relatives followed. Dolores, Warren's wife, hesitated, but after looking at her husband, she raised her hand as well. Edgar's adolescent children, perhaps 16 or 17, followed his lead hesitantly and awkwardly, but they nevertheless went along with it. I turned to see Ivy embracing Hazel closely. Her eyes were crimson and filled with tears that had not yet fallen. Hazel, completely oblivious of what was going on, looked up at her mother and murmured, "Mommy, why is everyone raising their hands? Should I raise mine too?" Ivy gripped her closer, attempting to keep the tears from falling down her cheeks. I glanced around and noticed a few reluctant hands. It was distant relatives such as Aunt Miriam and Uncle Clyde. They glanced at each other, then at me, divided between decency and peer pressure. Aunt Miriam stared at her husband and then at Uncle Warren, her face filled with uncertainty. Uncle Clyde chewed his lip, his palm resting on his thigh as if he were about to vote, but he still hesitated. Then Grandpa screamed, his voice booming, "Come on, I don't have all day." The pressure burst through the final amount of resistance. Those uncertain hands rose rapidly, almost as if they had been told to. I quickly counted in my brain. 30 out of 32 people raised their hands. Only Uncle Silas and his wife, Aunt Lillian, remained still. Silas had had enough. His face was glowing red with wrath, and his fists were clenched at his sides. He grabbed Lillian's hand and raced towards the door. As he passed Grandpa, he paused, looked him straight in the eyes, and whispered quietly, "I'm honestly ashamed of you." These words hovered in the air like a sentence being delivered. I had never heard Silas speak to Grandpa in that way before, not once in my life. He then approached me, put a gentle hand on my shoulder and said, "Let's go, Nolan. These people don't deserve to be called family." I was stunned. I'd never seen Uncle Silas like this before. The nice man who usually tried to keep the peace was now standing up with a fire I had never seen before. I didn't want Ivy and Hazel to have to go through this again, so I took their hands and followed Silas out of the room. As we passed Grandpa, my heart was filled with resentment. He invited me here solely to humiliate me in front of my wife and children. I kept thinking, why would you give me hope to crush it like that? Behind me, I could hear a few people snickering like if they had just seen the end of some bizarre little play. Hazel was still clutching her sketch, not understanding why we had to leave so quickly. As I looked at the uplifted hands that voted me out of that room, I realized I no longer had a grandfather, father, or family. As we approached the front door, a booming voice broke out behind us, "Stop right there!" We all froze automatically as Grandpa shouted. Despite his rage, Uncle Silas stopped in his tracks as he heard something in his voice that was forceful and irrefutable. Several seconds elapsed. The silence was so heavy that I could hear my heart beating in my ears. Then, Grandpa spoke again, louder and with clear authority. "The ones who are leaving tonight are not you." Uncle Silas and I turned back to look at him, perplexed. I had no idea what he was going to do, but there was a weird fire in his eyes that I had never seen before. He turned to face the remaining seated people, the same ones who had just raised their hands to vote me out, and remarked coldly, The people who need to leave are the ones with their hands in the air. The room exploded. Protesters raised their voices. Shouting came from all directions. My father sprang to his feet and said, "You've got to be kidding me. You can't do this." Uncle Warren and Uncle Edgar joined in, their voices frightened and loud. Warren, visibly shaken, remarked, "Are you serious, Dad?" Edgar took a step forward, attempting to play peacemaker. His tone became soft, almost false. "Dad, I just wanted to teach Nolan a little lesson. That's all. I didn't mean any harm." Distant relatives such as Aunt Miriam and Uncle Clyde began looking for explanations. Aunt Miriam, her voice quivering, added, "Uncle Everett, I only went along with the others. I didn't want to upset anyone. I wasn't trying to insult Nolan. I swear." Uncle Clyde nodded immediately in accord. "Yeah, that's right, sir. We just thought it was some family joke. We didn't realize how serious this was." But Grandpa shook his head slowly. His expression did not relax, not even slightly. He glanced directly at my father, then at Warren and Edgar. His eyes filled with profound disappointment. "Since you were kids, I taught you that family is about love and loyalty, and now you are mocking Nolan because he's a truck driver." My father was still attempting to salvage the moment, wanting to change the story. He stepped forward, furious in his tone. "I don't look down on him, but he needs to take responsibility. He's 32 and still driving trucks. I was trying to motivate him to do better." Grandpa's look became icy cold. He stared straight at my father and said, "Victor, aren't you ashamed of yourself?" My father's cheeks turned red. He responded firmly, "Why should I be?" Grandpa hesitated for a bit. Then, with a heavy heart, he glanced around the room and added, "Because 12 years ago, when you went bankrupt, Nolan, only 18, gave up college and became a truck driver. He didn't want to be a burden on you. And what did you do? Even while you were broke, you poured every last cent into Trent." Those words struck like a bomb. The entire room became silent. Everyone looked at my father. Trent stood beside him, his face drained of color, recognizing the truth had been revealed. The atmosphere became suffocating. I stood there in stunned silence, overcome by a torrent of bitter recollections from 12 years earlier. Ivy clasped my hand strongly. Hazel still had no idea what was going on, clutching the drawing she had drawn for her great-grandfather. Grandpa's comments transported me back to when I was 18, the year everything changed. That was the year our family declared bankruptcy when my father's construction company fell into major financial difficulties. He owed about $300,000, which seemed like a lot to us at the time. I made the difficult decision because I wanted to help my parents. Despite having received a scholarship, I decided to drop out of college. Instead of going to school, I obtained a commercial driver's license and began working as a long-haul trucker. For the next 2 years, I worked tirelessly. I paid Trent's high school tuition and the majority of the family's living expenses. Every month, I gave my whole wage to my mother, keeping barely enough to cover my basic requirements. Then, in 2015, Grandpa gifted my dad $400,000, allowing him to finally pay off his debt and restore his business. I genuinely believed things would improve from there. But rather than appreciating me for giving up my youth to support the family, my parents and Trent began to look down on me. Why? Dad's business partners disliked the idea of his kid driving a truck. They said it harmed the company's reputation. After a heated dispute at Christmas dinner in 2016, in which Dad flatly stated that he was humiliated to have a son who drove trucks, I cut off all contact. From that moment forward, I never returned home. When Ivy and I got married, we kept it simple with only a few close friends. When Hazel was born, I did not inform anyone in the family. I experienced the most significant periods of my life alone. In all those years away from the family, I only communicated with 2 people, Grandpa and Uncle Silas. They were the only people who really understood and supported me. Both of them had attempted to persuade my parents to reunite, but they refused. Their condition was clear. To be allowed back, I needed to change occupations. But I'd made up my mind, too. I wasn't going back unless they sincerely apologized because it wasn't only about me anymore. It was about Ivy and Hazel, and I would not let anyone treat them like I had been treated. So, standing there hearing Grandpa voice those facts aloud, speaking of the sacrifices I made, it felt like someone had finally seen it for the first time after years. Someone finally knew what I'd been through, and it meant more to me than I could ever express. Back at the celebration, after Grandpa reminded everyone of what had happened in the past, my father refused to confess his mistake. Instead, he doubled down, looking upset and defiantly told Grandpa, "I raised him. It's only fair that he pays me back. That is a child's obligation." Grandpa's face got angry when he heard such comments. At that point, he was no longer holding back. He shook his head in terrible disappointment, then glanced around the room with hatred in his eyes and said, "I had planned to split my savings among you today, but I have changed my mind. You do not deserve a cent." When Grandpa discussed his funds, the attitude in the room changed again. Panic spreads like wildfire. Voices rose at once. Yelling, protests, and bewilderment. My father rose to his feet, saying, "What are you talking about? That is our inheritance." Trent moved forward, his voice trembling. "Grandpa, you cannot do this. This is not fair." Grandpa lifted his hand sharply, gesturing for silence. "Enough," he said, his voice low and steady. Then, with calm authority, he announced, "The $4 million will be divided between Silas and Nolan." Uncle Warren exploded before he could finish his sentence. "What? For $1 million?" Grandpa nodded and spoke evenly. "Yes, I sold half of the farm 2 months ago. I would have divided the money equally between my 4 sons and 6 grandchildren. That would have cost $400,000 each. But after what I witnessed today, none of you deserve it." That's when the true panic struck. My father sank to his knees in front of Grandpa and clutched his hands fiercely. "Dad, I apologize. I was mistaken. Please give me one more chance." Uncles Edgar and Warren stepped in, presenting their causes. "Dad, we were only encouraging Nolan to do better. We did not intend to disrespect him." Trent, now sobbing, ran up to me and grabbed my arm. "I'm so sorry, Nolan. I was mistaken. Please forgive me." Unfortunately, it was too late. Grandpa glanced at them with a stone-cold, undisturbed, and absolute expression. Nothing could make him change his mind. I stood there startled, as if I were living a $1 million dream, a number I had never dared to consider. Grandpa raised his voice authoritatively as they continued to refuse to go. "Get the heck out of my home now," my father yelled out in wrath. "You can't do this. We will take you to court." Uncle Warren joined in, his tone stern and intimidating. "You are elderly, Dad. We can prove that you are not mentally able to manage your assets." Trent yelled out in frustration. I will not let this happen." But Grandpa just gave a dry, sarcastic chuckle, the kind of chuckle that knocked them down cold. Then, in a calm and almost pleased tone, he stated, "You are fools. Did you forget I still had half the farm? I'll transfer the deed to Silas and Nolan in 2 days." His comments struck them like a bucket of frigid water. They quickly understood they had not simply lost $4 million. The remaining half of the land was easily worth another $3 million, and now that would also be out of reach. They fell silent, knowing they'd run out of options. They fled one by one, furious, dejected, and bitter. Just before walking out the door, my father turned around, looked me dead in the eye with disdain, and said coldly, "Are you happy now, Nolan? You have broken this family apart." I did not respond. I simply drew Ivy and Hazel in close and held them firmly. Following their departure, the house fell into a peculiar, serene silence. Only 6 people remained in our family. Uncle Silas and Grandpa survey the untouched food still scattered across the dinner table. Grandpa turned to us and said, "Let's save only enough for the 6 of us. The others helped me box it up. We will take it to the destitute." This was not leftover food. It had just been delivered by a high-end restaurant earlier that afternoon. Nobody had touched it. The supper was scheduled to begin at 7 p.m., but by 6:30, Grandpa had already sent everyone else home. We all hurried swiftly to assist him pack the food and loaded into Uncle Silas's pickup. There were enough roasted chickens, bread, salads, desserts, and soda bottles to serve hundreds. Hazel eagerly joined in as we packed, looking up at me with curiosity. "Daddy, who are we giving the food to?" I said, gently brushing her hair back and smiling. "To people who need it, sweetie. Hungry people don't have a home to return to." The six of us then got into 2 cars and proceeded to Rockford's downtown district, where we knew there were many homeless individuals. It was a location I recalled from years ago, filled with people simply struggling to survive. When we arrived, Hazel glanced about with big eyes at the men and ladies sitting on the sidewalks in worn-out clothes. She gripped my hand tightly and whimpered, "Daddy, why don't they have a house?" I knelt alongside her, looked into her eyes, and spoke quietly. "There are lots of reasons, sweetheart, but what matters is that we can help them." Ivy and Aunt Lillian began serving the lunches while Grandpa and Uncle Silas engaged in private chats with several of the attendees. Hazel was shy at first, but she quickly began to offer boxes of cookies with her tiny hands full of kindness. The smiles, warm thank yous, and most notably, the sight of calm thankfulness in one elderly man's eyes as he received his dinner told us everything we needed to know. We were doing the correct thing. After we finished the last meal, Hazel came up to me and placed her arms around my waist. She said, "Daddy, I'm thrilled." Everyone smiled so nicely when they got their food. And that's when it struck me. This was the most memorable Christmas my family had ever celebrated. Around 8 o'clock, we returned to Grandpa's house and sat down to eat together. There were just 6 of us at the table, but the warmth and excitement made it feel more full than ever. As everyone gathered, Hazel reached into her small purse and took out the drawing she had been keeping. She stepped over and presented it to Grandpa, smiling proudly. He picked it up to check it thoroughly before smiling warmly and said, "This is beautiful. I'll hang it on the living room wall so everyone can see it." Hazel clapped her hands enthusiastically in response to his compliment. "I drew you with a big smile, great-grandpa," she added brightly. A little later, Ivy brought out the apple pie we had purchased earlier, and we all shared dessert. After supper, Grandpa recommended we move into the living room and converse for a little. He returned to his office holding 2 $2 million checks. When he handed me one, my hands trembled so violently that I was worried I'd drop it. Uncle Silas was equally as surprised, his hands shaking and his eyes wide with incredulity. We both looked to Grandpa, overwhelmed by gratitude. I could barely get the words out. "Thank you, Grandpa. I don't even know how to express how grateful I am." Grandpa nodded and continued, his tone calm yet serious. "In a few days, I'm transferring ownership of the remaining part of the farm to the 2 of you." We glanced at him, shocked. The remaining acreage was worth several millions more. Grandpa let out a deep sigh and added, "I don't trust the others anymore. You 2 are the only ones who deserve to carry on what I've built." Hearing it, my heart sank slightly. Not because of the money, but because of everything we had sacrificed as a family to be here. I stared at Grandpa, my voice shaking. "Grandpa, I know this must have hurt you deeply having to decide." Uncle Silas agreed and added, "Dad, I never wanted it to come to this either." Grandpa laid a hand on my shoulder and stated gently but firmly, "Nolan, I've watched them for years, and today was just the final straw. I know who has a good heart and who I can trust." Hearing those remarks, I buried my head, overwhelmed by emotion. I felt grateful for his faith, but also felt the weight of the duty he had placed in my hands. That night in Grandpa's guest bedroom, I lay close to Ivy and Hazel. My mind is entangled in a web of emotions. On the one hand, I felt a profound sense of relief and thankfulness for finally being noticed and supported in ways I never imagined. However, I couldn't shake the underlying despair, the sad reality that our family had utterly fallen apart. Once Hazel had fallen asleep, Ivy turned to me and said, "I still can't believe this is real." I softly gripped her hand and said back, "Me neither, but we must use this money wisely. Cannot change who we are." After a brief silence, we reached an agreement. No boasting, There will be no showing off. We would utilize this gift to create something better, more lasting for our small family. The next morning, as Ivy and I returned to our Chicago apartment, we were met with an unpleasant surprise in the lobby outside the elevator along with my parents and Trent. Faces tensed, posture is firm with determination. They came over as soon as they saw me and demanded that I divide the $2 million I had received into 4 equal portions. They said it was only fair. I didn't see any cause to argue. With a cold, hard tone, I looked them straight in the eyes and stated, "If you think you have a case, take it to court, but I'm not giving you a penny." My father lost his cool when he heard that. He started ranting, calling me ungrateful, greedy, and selfish. He hurled every possible abuse. His statements were cutting and malicious, intended to wound, but I was not going to stand there and accept it. Without another word, I turned around, grabbed Ivy and Hazel's hands, and headed right into the elevator. A building security guard intervened barely in time to prevent them from pursuing us. That same afternoon, Ivy and I reached a clear conclusion. We updated our telephone numbers. We only gave the new ones to Grandpa and Uncle Silas, the 2 individuals we still wanted in our lives. It was a difficult decision, but we knew it was the only way to save our peace. We couldn't let selfish, nasty people continue to disrupt the life we were attempting to create. After receiving the money, I did not waste it right away. Instead, I determined that my first investment should be in myself. I utilized the first $10,000 to enroll in a Chicago Community College business and asset management program. I spent 3 months learning the essentials of accounting, human resource management, marketing, and business planning. Most nights after finishing my trucking shifts, I stayed up late studying, determined to get the abilities I knew I needed. When the course completed, I began taking the first steps toward fulfilling a long-held dream of creating my own trucking firm. The first order of business was to locate a warehouse and a small office space. I went to dozens of places before choosing a small warehouse on the outskirts of town that provided a reasonable rental fee. On the first day, there were no banners or extravagant celebrations. Grandpa, Uncle Silas, and their families joined me for a simple ribbon cutting in front of the warehouse. That was more than enough. When Grandpa smiled proudly beside me, I knew I was on the right track. This was not simply the start of a business. It demonstrated that I could stand on my own 2 feet and create something worthwhile with Grandpa's trust in me. The early challenges were real. Getting permits, securing truck insurance, and finding dependable drivers kept me awake at night. There were times when I almost gave up, such as when a key client dropped out because they thought my company was too tiny and inexperienced. However, each setback taught us a valuable lesson. When I lost a client, I realized I needed to improve my presentation skills. When a driver unexpectedly quit, I learned how to form a backup crew. Every obstacle became an opportunity for growth. Throughout this voyage, Grandpa and Uncle Silas served as my personal advisory board. With his years of business knowledge, Grandpa would frequently call to guide me through client discussions. Uncle Silas assisted me in reviewing contracts and provided advice on prudent financial management. Thanks to their encouragement and supervision, I gradually gained confidence and experience, and gradually I started expanding the business. It's been a 1.5 years since that Christmas party, which changed my life forever. My company has developed beyond what I could have expected. We now have 10 long-haul trucks and a team of 20 dedicated personnel. With a consistent revenue from the business, we moved out of that tiny apartment and into a cozy 2-story home in Naperville, a suburb of Chicago. It includes a large backyard where Hazel can run free, a quiet office for me to work in, and a roomy living room with a fireplace, which is our favorite location to hang out on weekends. Hazel is 7 and in 2nd grade. She's excelling in school, and I couldn't be happier. Ivy has left her sales career to focus on our family and assist me with the company's accounting. My friendship with Grandpa and Uncle Silas has gotten much stronger. Every weekend we drive to Rockford to see Grandpa. He's 80 now, as sharp as ever, and always ready with sound business advice. He proudly displays the drawing Hazel gave him on his wall as if it were a masterpiece. Meanwhile, Uncle Silas has taken on the role of unofficial financial advisor. He assists me in reviewing significant contracts and developing plans for future expansion. I had not seen or heard from my parents since that day. I assumed I never would, but I was mistaken. They unexpectedly showed up at my front door yesterday, pale, worn out, and desperate. I'm not sure how they acquired my address. This time, there were no insults or shouting, only pleading. They asked for $400,000 to save their home. My father had made another poor financial decision by participating in a questionable real estate transaction. He had mortgaged the house and was now unable to pay it back. I wasn't moved by their lovely remarks and sobbing apologies. Instead, I offered them a simple condition. I responded, "If you can tell me my birthday, I'll help." 5 minutes of agonizing quiet ensued. They glanced at each other and attempted to recollect, but were unable to. My father stated he assumed it was in October. Trent guessed the 15th. Nobody noticed that my birthday is December 23rd. They lived with me for 18 years and none of them knew. I saw the disappointment on their faces. I said nothing more. I closed the door calmly. There is no anger, just indifferent. Later, I told Grandpa the entire thing on the phone. His pleasant voice came through. "Good job, Nolan. I am proud of you. And so, what are your thoughts on this story? Was it right or wrong for me to turn them away? I would love to hear your thoughts." Now on to the next story. Story 3. My boyfriend lost a dare and the bet was that I had to kiss his brother on the spot. He didn't even ask if I was okay with it. He just laughed and told his brother, "Raphael, it's all my fault I put you in a tough spot." I looked coldly at my boyfriend of 3 years. I had clearly told him multiple times that his brother had ulterior motives toward me. "What are you thinking? Raphael comes from a wealthy family. He wouldn't be interested in someone like you. Don't flatter yourself. What are you comparing scared to him? Why would he ever look at you?" Clearly, he was willfully blind, not noticing how his brother was staring at me like a hungry wolf all night. I clicked my tongue in front of my boyfriend and boldly sat on Raphael's lap, kissing him. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my boyfriend casually chatting with other friends. After the party ended, I received a message from Raphael saying, "That was my first kiss. You have to take responsibility." I looked coldly at Gabriel, my anger boiling inside me. He had the audacity to make me kiss his brother for a stupid dare. What was even more ridiculous was that he didn't even ask for my opinion, treating me like some object to be used. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress my anger and disappointment. Since the start of the party, Raphael's gaze had been like that of a wolf fixed on me, making me feel sick. Yet Gabriel remained oblivious, still laughing and joking with others. I gritted my teeth, deciding it was time to teach him a lesson. Without hesitation, I sat on Raphael's lap and stared into his eyes. The surrounding cheers seemed to be muted, everything becoming a blur. I closed my eyes and initiated the kiss, pressing my lips to Raphael's. The moment our tongues touched, I felt Raphael tremble noticeably. 5 minutes felt like a century, and I forced myself to continue the kiss despite my discomfort. Finally, when the time was up, I pushed Raphael away and stood up. I looked around. Everyone was staring at me in shock while Gabriel was still chatting with friends. I let out a cold laugh and turned to leave that suffocating room. I heard someone teasing Gabriel behind me as I stepped out the door. "Gabriel, aren't you mad that your girlfriend kissed someone else? What's there to be angry about?" "It wasn't real," Gabriel replied dismissively. My heart dropped and I quickened my pace to escape that toxic place. Once home, I locked myself in my room, ignoring Gabriel's persistent knocking. My phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. I opened it and instantly felt a chill run down my spine. That was my first kiss. "You have to take responsibility." I decided not to reply to Raphael's message and to handle the situation coldly. But days passed and Gabriel still showed no signs of remorse. My heart felt heavy, like a massive stone pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. Finally, on the 5th night, Gabriel showed up at my door with bubble tea. "I'm sorry, I didn't expect things to turn out this way," he said, handing me the bubble tea in a casual tone. I reluctantly took it, but my resentment hadn't faded at all. I pulled out my phone and showed Gabriel the message from Raphael. I told you before that he had ulterior motives towards me. Gabriel frowned and said, "You're not on the same level as him. Stop flattering yourself. He probably just continued the dare after you left. There's no way he'd be interested in you." Those words cut through me like a knife. I felt dizzy, completely let down by Gabriel's disrespect. We began to argue fiercely, the sweetness of our relationship fracturing in the heat of our argument. Suddenly, I recalled Raphael's wolf-like gaze. I stood at the entrance of the amusement park, feeling disappointed and angry. Gabriel bailed on me again. It wasn't the first time. I took a deep breath and decided to go in alone and have fun. As soon as I entered, I saw a familiar figure. Raphael was standing not far away, waving and smiling at me. "Gabriel asked me to hang out with you. Something came up last minute and he couldn't make it," Raphael explained. A wave of bitterness hit me. Gabriel couldn't even bother explaining it himself. But looking at Raphael's sunny smile, my mood instantly lifted. We rode the roller coaster together. Amidst all the screams, I felt a long-lost sense of joy. Raphael thoughtfully bought me cotton candy and the sugary sweetness filled my mouth. We chatted about work and life, and the atmosphere was surprisingly pleasant. Without realizing it, I found myself glancing at Raphael's profile in the sunlight. His features looked especially handsome. Suddenly, I remembered that kiss from the other day and my heart started racing. Raphael seemed to notice my gaze and turned to smile at me. In that moment, it felt like I was falling into a warm dream. We rode the Ferris wheel together, taking in the beautiful view of the amusement park from above. As the sun set, Raphael gently took my hand. I didn't pull away, letting the warmth spread through me. After the Ferris wheel, Raphael suggested we explore the haunted house. In the darkness, I instinctively moved closer to him, feeling his body heat. As we walked out of the haunted house, we shared a smile, as if we had just gone through an adventure together. On the way home, I realized I had completely forgotten about Gabriel. Raphael walked me to my door, hesitated for a moment, and gently kissed my cheek. I stood there watching him walk away, a sweet feeling rising in my heart. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Gabriel. I stared at the screen. Gabriel's message left me with mixed emotions. "Sorry. A friend from abroad returned unexpectedly, and I just couldn't get away." I let out a cold laugh. I was so tired of hearing excuses like this. I couldn't shake Raphael's kindness from my mind. It was such a sharp contrast to Gabriel. I hesitated about whether to tell Gabriel about today. In the end, I chose to stay silent. Just then, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Raphael. "Did you have fun today? I hope I didn't let you down." Looking at the message, I couldn't help but smile. I quickly replied, "I had a great time. Thank you for hanging out with me." Raphael responded almost instantly, "My pleasure. I'd love to hang out with you again." My heart raced suddenly and a strange feeling spread through my chest. I knew this wasn't right, but I just couldn't stop myself. Over the next few days, Raphael frequently reached out to me, sending sweet messages every day. Meanwhile, Gabriel seemed to be slowly fading into a distant corner of my memory. I knew I was sliding toward a dangerous edge, but I couldn't help it. Every word Raphael said was like a shot of adrenaline, pulling me deeper into this. I started fantasizing about what life would be like if I were with Raphael. However, just as I was lost in these sweet thoughts, Raphael suddenly sent me a message. It was a picture of Gabriel holding another girl, comforting her. I stared at my phone screen, my heart feeling like it was tightly gripped by an invisible hand. In the photo, Gabriel was holding an unfamiliar girl's shoulders, gently comforting her. My mind went blank in an instant and all my trust collapsed in that moment. What's going on? I trembled as I typed a message to Raphael. Raphael replied quickly, "I'm not sure either. I just saw it when I was passing by Gabriel's house today." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down, and decided to go directly to Gabriel to ask for an explanation. Pushing open Gabriel's door, I saw the girl sitting on the sofa crying, while Gabriel was busy in the kitchen. Who is she? I struggled to control my tone, trying not to let my anger and jealousy spill over. Gabriel turned around, a flicker of panic crossing his face. Ashley, what are you doing here? This is my friend from school. She just got back from abroad. I scoffed. A friend? Is that why you were holding her so closely to comfort her? Is that why you didn't go to the amusement park that day? Gabriel's expression turned slightly annoyed. What are you thinking? It's because her pet is sick and in the hospital. I was just comforting her, he defended. And the other day when her pipe burst, I was just helping her, he added. Suddenly, I remembered that over the years, I had always handled any plumbing issues at home myself. So you can fix pipes? I said sarcastically. I've never seen you lift a finger all these years. Gabriel's face darkened instantly. What exactly are you trying to say? Is there something wrong with helping a friend? I felt dizzy as all my doubts and insecurities erupted in that moment. This is a huge problem, I nearly shouted. You've kept so much from me and you expect me to trust you. Gabriel's demeanor suddenly turned cold. Believe it or not, I don't owe you any explanations. I turned to leave, tears blurring my vision, filled with grievance and anger. Back home, I curled up on the sofa, replaying the scenes from earlier in my mind. My phone vibrated. Raphael's message read, "Are you okay? Do you need someone to talk to?" I stared at the screen, suddenly struck by a bold idea. Maybe it was time to teach Gabriel a lesson. I focused on the phone screen, my finger trembling as I hit send. Raphael, I want to see you. Almost instantly, Raphael replied, "Sure, I'll be right there." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the turmoil inside me. Less than half an hour later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to see Raphael's concerned gaze. "What happened?" he asked softly, worry evident in his eyes. I couldn't help but jump into his arms, tears screaming down my face. Raphael gently patted my back, reassuring me, "It's okay. I'm here." I looked up at his gentle eyes, a sudden impulse surging within me. We were kissing intensely. His hands gently caressed my body. My body shivered. A warmth slowly began to build inside me. Our tongues entwined. I felt a hardness against my back. Raphael's hands slowly slid down my body. The hardness filled me. The door suddenly swung open. Gabriel stood there, his face pale, filled with anger and disbelief. Seeing Gabriel's pale face at the door, my heart raced. Not with fear or regret, but with a deep anger mixed with a twisted sense of justice. He stood there looking at us with pure indignation and shock, as if he were the victim, as if all his lies and excuses meant nothing. The scene was almost comical, and I felt my lips curl into a cold, satisfied smile. At last, he was feeling the consequences of his own choices, and this was just the beginning. Gabriel stood frozen in the doorway, unable to find the words. Raphael, realizing his brother was there, slowly moved away from me, unsure of what to do or say. But I, unlike him, was done with trying to keep up appearances, done pretending that what Gabriel did didn't affect me. I wore my anger like armor and stood up, facing him directly. "So this is how it is," he finally managed to murmur, his voice low and full of contempt. "This is what happens when someone plays with another's trust." I responded, keeping my gaze steady, showing no hint of regret. "You never had the courage to be honest with me, never cared about my feelings. It was always about what you wanted, who you could keep around while pushing me aside." Gabriel scoffed, crossing his arms defensively. "And you think that justifies this kind of betrayal? That you can do whatever you want without consequences?" I laughed, a bitter sound that filled the room with a heavy tension. "Betrayal? Gabriel, you destroyed everything long before I ever thought of getting close to Raphael. Do you think I didn't notice your excuses, your poorly told lies, the way you disregarded my feelings every time I tried to talk about us? Every time I asked you about that friend?" I made air quotes, feeling the indignation build up inside me. It was as if nothing I said mattered, as if I were just some piece you could manipulate and control however you wanted. Gabriel took a step forward, his eyes narrowing, almost glowing with rage. So you decided to get revenge? To pay me back in the worst possible way? It wasn't about revenge, I replied, my voice firm and clear. It was about realizing that you never valued me. It was about understanding that I deserved to be treated with respect. Respect. Something you never knew how to do while you were busy helping a friend with your pathetic excuses. Raphael was here showing me what it's like to truly be wanted, valued. Raphael, standing beside me, looked uncomfortable but didn't move. He knew this confrontation was inevitable and that I needed to say everything I had bottled up for so long. Gabriel, however, seemed increasingly out of control. His face twisted with frustration and wounded pride. You're really selfish, you know that? He spat, his words full of disdain. All you thought about was yourself, feeding your own ego. My eyes narrowed, my remaining patience finally running out. Selfish? Selfish is spending years by someone's side pretending to care while you chase after any distraction that comes along, ignoring the person who's been there with you. Selfish is making empty promises, asking for patience when it was clear that you didn't really care. I wasn't being selfish, Gabriel. I was freeing myself from the emotional prison you created around me. He clenched his fists, breathing deeply, visibly struggling to maintain control. For a moment, it looked like he wanted to say something, but he just stared at me, unable to find the words. His arrogance and wounded pride wouldn't allow him to admit any fault, and I realized with painful clarity that he would never change. The silence between us grew heavy, and I could see Raphael shifting nervously beside me. But his reaction didn't matter to me at that moment. What mattered was that I was finally in control, that for the first time I had broken the chains tying me to Gabriel. I think it's best if you leave, Gabriel, I declared, my voice now cold and calculated. We have nothing left to say to each other. He looked at me, incredulous, as if he couldn't believe I was really asking him to leave. He expected me to beg for his forgiveness, to show some kind of regret, but the truth was in that moment I felt free, light. All I wanted was to move forward without the weight of someone who never valued me. This isn't over, he muttered, his voice full of threats as he stepped back. You're going to regret all of this. I simply watched him walk out, the door closing behind him with a bang that echoed through the house. But instead of feeling afraid, a smile spread across my lips because finally the mask had fallen, and I was free to be who I truly was without hiding or pretending to please someone who never deserved me. Raphael was still by my side, looking at me with a mixture of concern and respect. Without a word, he pulled me close, embracing me protectively. And as I nestled into his arms, I knew that the chapter with Gabriel was over, that I had overcome a painful part of my life. From that moment on, all I wanted was to focus on myself and my own worth. From that day forward, I promised myself that I would never again allow anyone to underestimate, belittle, or devalue me. Today my life is in a completely different place, and both Gabriel and Raphael now hold very distinct places in my story. After everything I went through with Gabriel, I finally found the peace and clarity I had been longing for. It was a long process, but I managed to leave behind the weight of that relationship with all its lies and manipulations. Gabriel is now just a life lesson, someone who taught me where my boundaries lie and that no one should ever be allowed to disrupt my peace and well-being. He's gone on with his life and I with mine, knowing I deserve much more than he could ever offer. With Raphael, things took a different turn. In the beginning, he was an essential support, someone who offered me comfort when I needed it most. He showed me that I wasn't alone, that there were people who would value me for who I am and that I could feel free to be myself. But with time we both realized that our connection was partly built on the wounds and pain left behind by my relationship with Gabriel. What started as a mutual refuge became something more complicated, and we understood that we each needed time to heal. So we acknowledged that while the bond between us was important, it didn't necessarily mean we were meant to be together. Today I'm at peace. I'm moving forward with my life, focused on my own dreams and goals. My friendships and career are now a source of joy and fulfillment, and each day I feel more certain of who I am and what I deserve. Raphael and I remain friends, and I'll always be grateful for the support he gave me. Gabriel, meanwhile, is a closed chapter, a story from which I learned valuable lessons and that I've now left in the past. Finally, I feel in control, building a future that's truly my own, full of possibilities and far removed from anything that once made me doubt myself. Now on to the next story. Story 4. My ex-girlfriend invited me to her wedding with the intention of humiliating me by showing off her rich new partner. So I brought a special guest as my +1. By the end of the night, she was left crying because her marriage was over. Despite her yelling, I kept my calm and reminded her that every man has different needs. Ben clearly came from an affluent family. Hence, he might not care as much as me about his career, but I like my career. I also told her that if she wanted a man like Ben, she should be with him. I told her that we should not argue about this further and that she could move out of our place as soon as she could. Her eyes widened, and she asked me how I could afford to pay rent. I explained to her that I had received a raise in my salary and that I was now capable of paying the entire rent without having any roommates. Hearing this, she began to shout, telling me that I was trying to show off in front of her. She told me how Ben was richer than me and even had his own house which his father had bought for him. She kept yelling that I needed to change myself and become more complacent. She then sneered at me, saying that at the end of the day, women wanted a house husband and not a man who could earn more than them. At this point, I asked her to shut up as I was tired of arguing with her in the middle of the night. I told her she had until the end of the month to move out, and until then, she could sleep on the couch. I could hear her still grumbling, but I ignored her and went back to sleep. Fortunately, over the week, Lily started to pack and slowly move out her things. I was starting to get excited, thinking about the prospect of finally having this entire place all for my own. On her last night, when I came back home, I was shocked to see Lily and Ben sitting on our couch. I looked at her curiously, and she informed me that because this was her last night at this place, she wanted to show Ben where she lived. I couldn't believe the audacity she had to bring another man into this place without asking me, knowing that I was going to be back. I didn't want to be rude to Ben as I thought this wasn't his fault, so I shouldn't be rude to a guest. I politely greeted him, but to my surprise, he looked at me with contempt and didn't even bother to acknowledge my presence. I decided to not take it personally and went to freshen up. Later, while I was cooking pasta for myself in the kitchen, Ben came to get some water. He stood there watching me for a minute, which made me feel awkward. I asked him if there was something he wanted, but he gave me the same contemptuous look as before. I decided to ignore his presence and continue to cook so I could take the meal back to the bedroom and eat in peace. After I was done eating, as I was about to come downstairs, I overheard Lily and Ben talking. Ben was telling Lily how lucky she was to have upgraded herself after dating someone who looked like me. I froze in shock as I heard Lily laughing and agreeing with him. Then Ben asked her why she ever fell in love with me, and that's when Lily said something that completely shattered me. She confessed that she had used me because I was gullible enough to pay for our dates when we went out and used to lend her money during college. She even revealed that I had paid more than half of the rent for the last couple of years, which allowed her to save a lot of money. I could not believe what I had just heard. I had always suspected that she might have used my good nature to pay more than half of the rent, but I had no idea she had been using me since the very beginning. She then continued to talk about our relationship and basically made fun of me in every way. I was going to burst out in tears because of how humiliated I felt, but I didn't want to let them see me in this state, so I quietly headed back upstairs and spent the rest of the night quietly crying into my pillow. The next morning when I woke up, Lily and Ben were gone. She had taken the last of her things and had officially moved out. I walked around the house in a daze, and I knew that I was finally free from her. I cannot begin to describe how light I felt knowing that she was finally gone from my life. In this house, I cried tears of happiness and danced around the house. Then I set about cleaning the entire place so that there would be no reminder of her anywhere. Over the next few weeks, I have thoroughly enjoyed living on my own. I had stopped caring about what Lily and Ben had spoken about me. All was going well until 2 months later when our mutual friend informed me at work that Lily was getting married to Ben. I was taken aback because it all seemed too sudden. Our friend showed me their engagement pictures, and they appeared to be very happy together. While I felt a slight pang of sadness for how Lily had used me all these years, I also recognized I would have never been satisfied with her anyway. Therefore, I was pleased that she had found someone who could make her happy. That same night, when I came back home and checked my mailbox, I found an unexpected wedding invitation. My eyes widened in shock as I realized it was from Lily and Ben. I was starting to think it was maybe a mistake where she had invited me just as a courtesy, until I opened the invitation and saw that she had scribbled something in the corner. Written inside the card was, "I want you to attend my wedding, so you can see the grand life I'm going to have with Ben." It slowly sunk in that she had invited me only in the hopes of showing off her marriage, her rich partner, and her newfound wealth. I took a deep breath, trying to understand why she would even send an invitation like this to me when all I had done was take care of her over the years. All the years of anger and frustration I had pent up inside kept boiling out, and I knew that I had to get petty with her. I RSVP'd with a +1. I had a plan forming in my head and was determined to make Lily regret ever inviting me. I opened up my laptop and began scrolling through Ben's social media profiles. I scanned through each and every social media picture that he had ever posted. As luck would have it, I finally found what I was looking for. Just 6 months ago, Ben had broken up with his ex-girlfriend, Jessica. He had several posts with her, and their pictures dated back to high school, which meant they had clearly been together for a very long time. I sent a friend request to Jessica from my profile, and when she accepted, I sent her a message. To my surprise, she responded and we started talking. I was upfront with her about my identity as Lily's ex and told her about my plan to invite her as my +1 to their wedding. She seemed intrigued and curious as to why I was reaching out to her, but I explained everything to her. Over the next few weeks, Jessica opened up about how Ben had cheated on her multiple times, and his latest affair had been with Lily. This was news to me because I had no idea about this. She continued to reveal how Ben was always into younger women. Hence, she wasn't surprised much when he announced that he was in love with Lily while they were still dating. As you can imagine, they had a pretty bad breakup, and she had blocked him from everywhere, despite him telling her that they should remain friends. From the way she talked about Ben, it seemed like she was still in love with him. I also told Jessica about my own experience with Lily and how she had used me for all those years. I poured my heart out to her, describing everything that Lily had put me through and how Ben and Lily had made fun of me. Jessica was shocked to hear about the way Lily had treated me and spoken about me. After hearing everything, Jessica finally agreed to accompany me. I felt excited thinking of the look on my ex and Ben's faces when they saw me attend their wedding with Jessica. On the day of the wedding, as expected, Lily's eyes widened when she saw me walking in with my special guest. She must have immediately recognized Jessica as Ben's ex. We ignored her expressions and pretended to find our designated seats. Lily came up to me and angrily whispered, asking why I was here with Ben's ex, but I simply smiled. She could not make a scene in front of everyone and had to begrudgingly walk back up to the aisle, eyeing me angrily. When it was time for the groom to make his entrance, everyone stood up from their seats. Ben looked stunning in his black tuxedo as he walked down the aisle with his father by his side. The ceremony went smoothly, and the celebrations moved to the reception area. Ben must have gone to change, because he was wearing a different suit when he entered the area. After witnessing the wedding ceremony, Jessica and I stayed low-key throughout the reception. We made sure to ignore Lily's angry glares and Ben's obvious irritation. I knew she desperately wanted to confront us, but she couldn't afford to cause a scene at her own wedding. Meanwhile, I just watched everything unfold with a sense of inner satisfaction, knowing the impact of my presence was just beginning. When it was time for the toasts, Lily finally couldn't hold back any longer. She approached us while everyone was distracted and, with a forced smile, hissed through clenched teeth, "What are you two doing here? Do you really think you can ruin my special day?" Jessica, with an equally sarcastic smile, answered before I could, "Oh, Lily dear, we're not here to ruin anything. We're here to celebrate. After all, it's such a big day, isn't it?" Lily was on the verge of losing her temper, but I interrupted her before she could say something that might draw attention from the guests. "Let's keep up appearances, Lily. You wouldn't want your husband to know that you're still so obsessed with me, right?" Her eyes flashed with rage, but she turned on her heel and walked back to Ben, who had no idea what was happening. Throughout the rest of the party, Jessica and I made a point of looking like we were having a great time, laughing together and exchanging knowing glances. It wasn't entirely an act. The truth is, while this started as a plan for revenge, I was genuinely beginning to enjoy Jessica's company. She was sharp, witty, and above all, she understood what I had gone through. Then something unexpected happened. As we danced, I noticed Ben approaching Jessica. He seemed agitated, and soon I realized they were arguing in hushed tones. I moved closer discreetly and overheard Ben saying something like, "Why are you here with him? This has nothing to do with you. We're over. Remember?" Jessica laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. "We're over because you cheated on me, Ben. Remember? And now you expect me to care about who I hang out with." I just watched from a distance while Ben struggled to keep his cool. Jessica wasn't making it easy for him, and I knew that all of this was messing with his head. And that's when I decided to turn up the heat. I grabbed a glass of champagne and walked up to the microphone that had been used for the toasts. "Sorry to interrupt everyone," I began with a smile on my face. All eyes turned to me, including those of Lily and Ben, who looked incredulous. "I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank the bride, Lily, for inviting me to this very special event." I paused, savoring the tension in the air. For those who don't know me, I'm her ex, and I'm really happy to see that she's found a man who can give her the life she's always dreamed of. By the way, Ben, congratulations on your acquisition. Your marriage. The room fell into an awkward silence, with guests exchanging uncertain glances. Lily looked like she was on the verge of breaking down in tears, while Ben clenched his fists, barely containing his anger. But I wasn't finished yet. I'd also like to raise a glass to honesty and transparency in a relationship. I lifted my glass, staring directly at Ben and Lily. "May you never lack them like I did." Then I took a slow sip, smiling mockingly. At this point, Ben was furious. He slammed down his glass and started storming toward me, but a few mutual friends stepped in to hold him back before he could reach me. "You've crossed the line," he shouted, while I just kept smiling. "You think this is funny? You think you can just come here and ruin our day?" I looked him in the eye, still calm, and said, "I didn't ruin anything, Ben. I'm just here to see how things go when you can't buy someone's respect or love." As he struggled against those restraining him, Lily began to sob, tears streaming down her face as she shouted at Ben, "Why are you paying attention to him? This is our day, Ben, not his." But what happened next was even more unexpected. Jessica, who had stayed by my side in silence until now, stepped forward and, in front of everyone, said loudly, "You know, Ben, you deserve this, because I remember very well how you toyed with my feelings while you were already eyeing Lily." Her words echoed through the room, and now all the guests were witnessing a spectacle they never saw coming. Ben, speechless, looked at Jessica with a mix of anger and surprise, and at that moment, Lily, consumed by desperation, started yelling, "I should never have invited you, you ungrateful jerk. I just wanted to show you that I'm better off without you." I merely shrugged and replied, "And I wanted to see if you really were. Apparently, you still have something to prove to me." By now, the venue security was approaching, but Jessica and I were already ready to leave. As we walked toward the exit, I could hear Lily and Ben's shouting echoing through the hall. The fairy tale wedding she had planned had turned into a disaster, and in a way, I felt satisfied to have given her a taste of what she had tried to do to me. On the way out, Jessica turned to me and asked, "Do you think we went too far?" I chuckled softly and replied, "I think we went just as far as we needed to." In the days that followed, I heard rumors that Ben and Lily had a massive fight and their marriage was already on the rocks. She was desperately trying to keep up appearances, but everyone knew that their marriage had started on a disastrous note. And although I knew that this probably made me a bit vengeful, I couldn't help but feel that for the first time in a long time, I had gotten a sense of justice. After the wedding scandal, Jessica and I left the venue with a sense of accomplishment. We went on with our lives, but I couldn't help but feel curious about what would happen with Lily and Ben after that disastrous night. And of course, The gossip soon started to reach my ears through mutual friends who unknowingly fed my curiosity. In the first few days after the wedding, things seemed calm, but I knew that was just a facade. Ben and Lily were trying to show on social media that they were a happy couple, posting smiling photos and making sure to attend social events as if everything was perfect. But I knew Lily well enough to recognize that her smiling face hid a storm that was about to explode. And that storm hit faster and harder than I expected. Not long after, I learned that their honeymoon was a complete disaster. Ben, who had kept quiet during the wedding scandal, exploded with anger as soon as their plane touched down at the exotic destination they had chosen. He couldn't get the humiliation of facing Jessica and me out of his head, the loser that he and Lily had so often belittled. They fought almost the entire trip. Every dinner, every outing they went on, the tension was palpable. Ben accused Lily of inviting Jessica and me on purpose, while Lily cried, trying to defend herself and insisting she only wanted to show she had moved on. He called her selfish, saying she only thought of herself and couldn't understand how she could be so reckless as to nearly ruin her own reputation on their wedding day. When they returned from the trip, things got even worse. Ben, who initially seemed unconcerned about money, started pressuring Lily to contribute more to their expenses, as he was now dealing with the financial strain of the extravagant wedding and honeymoon. The love and romance quickly vanished, and each day brought a new argument about money, about who was contributing more, and about their future. Then one day, a mutual friend called me, eager to share the latest news. Lily had moved back in with her parents after a fight so intense that the neighbors almost called the police. "You won't believe this," he said, trying to contain his excitement. "They're practically separated, and from what I heard, he's the one who kicked her out." I tried not to show too much interest, but I couldn't help but smile with satisfaction upon hearing that Ben, the perfect wealthy guy, was now alone in the house his father had bought for him, while Lily found herself forced to return to the very place she had tried so hard to escape, her parents' home, without the financial freedom she had built up over the years while I paid more than half of her rent. A few weeks later, I found out that Ben had stumbled upon old messages of Lily where she talked about how she had used my generosity to save money while we were together. That was the final straw for him. "She used me just like she used him," he supposedly told one of the friends who still kept in touch with both of them. The humiliation he felt during the wedding now mixed with the bitterness of realizing that maybe he wasn't so different from me in her eyes. Ben felt betrayed, and Lily, seeing that she couldn't save the marriage, fell into despair. Around that time, Lily started trying to contact me again. At first, it was simple messages, as if she wanted to clarify what had happened at the wedding. Then came the phone calls, one after another, where she cried saying she didn't know what to do, that Ben had left her with nothing. I ignored every attempt, blocking each new number she used to try and reach me. I'd already done my part. She used me, humiliated me, and tried to step on me, but now she was sinking on her own. One day, when I was leaving work, I ran into Jessica, and we ended up going for coffee together. She always knew the latest updates before I did. "Did you hear that Ben put the house up for sale?" she asked with a mischievous smile. "Looks like things didn't turn out as well as he expected. And apparently his parents aren't too happy with how he handled all of this either. I think he's lost their financial support." I couldn't help but laugh. The great Ben, who once seemed untouchable in his privileged position, was now trying to sell the house he had used to impress Lily. I knew that his downfall wasn't entirely my doing, but I couldn't help but feel that my presence at that wedding had been the spark that set off everything that came after. The months passed, and Lily stopped trying to contact me. She seemed to have finally realized that there was nothing more she could get from me. And as for me, I was enjoying every moment of my new life. My career was going well, and living alone was everything I needed to start fresh. One night, while I was watching a movie, I got a message from Jessica. She had come across a long social media post from Lily talking about learning from mistakes and the importance of valuing those who are by your side. It was clearly a regretful message about what she had lost, an attempt to paint herself as the victim after everything she had done. I just laughed and replied to Jessica, "Some people never change." And deep down, I knew that even if Lily tried to rewrite her version of the story, I had finally come out on top. She had tried to humiliate me, but she ended up sinking in her own arrogance. Ben, who entered her life as the grand prize, had become a constant reminder that appearances don't last forever. And as for me, I moved on, free from the weight of both of them, with the satisfaction of knowing that the best revenge was watching their relationship crumble without me lifting a finger beyond accepting that invitation. Now on to the next story. Story 5. I'm 32M. My name's Julian, and for most of my adult life, I've been the financial backbone of my family. By choice at first, then by guilt, and eventually out of obligation I never agreed to but couldn't seem to shake. I make decent money as a systems engineer. Good money, honestly, but not enough to bankroll 4 fully grown adults and their endless string of bad decisions without eventually asking myself why I kept doing it. Still, every month, like clockwork, I send over $2,000. $1,200 for rent on the apartment my parents and younger brother shared, for $100 for the spare car they constantly claimed was ours, and a few hundred more for food, phone bills, and whatever else they insisted they couldn't live without. Never once did I hear a thank you, not even once. But I didn't start questioning it seriously until my birthday came around this year. It was a Wednesday. Nothing special, no expectations. I'd planned a quiet dinner with my girlfriend and a few coworkers who'd become more like family over the years. Around noon, I opened the family group chat out of habit. There were messages flying around. My brother, Zach, had just passed his driver's test. My dad was joking about how many fender benders he'd cost. My mom was sending blurry photos of him holding his temporary license like it was the freaking crown jewels. I scrolled up and up. Not a single mention of my birthday. I typed, "Hey, just wondering, did you all forget today's my birthday?" and hit send before I could second-guess this myself. The read receipts popped up fast. Dad saw it. Zach saw it. Then Mom. A moment later, 3 gray dots danced at the bottom of the screen. I waited. Then her reply came, "Why would we waste time on your birthday? You're an adult. Get over it." I stared at it for a long time like it had been written in a different language. Waste time? I reread it 3 times before closing the app. My hands were cold and not from the air. It was like the words had sucked the warmth straight out of me. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad at first. I felt hollow, like something I'd been clinging to, some last thread of connection, had finally snapped. I told my girlfriend what happened that night over dinner. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You don't owe them your whole life, Jules," she said quietly. "You know that, right?" I nodded, but I didn't really believe it until the next morning. I woke up early like usual, made coffee, sat on the balcony of my condo, and watched the city wake up. It was still cold out, but the sun was breaking through, and I sat there sipping my coffee, replaying every single thing I'd done for them. Every rent payment, every emergency wire transfer, every time I gave up something for myself so they wouldn't have to struggle. I remember driving 3 hours in a blizzard to fix their busted heater. I remembered signing the lease on that apartment in my name because their credit was trash. I remembered loaning Zach my second car for the weekend 2 years ago and never getting it back. And I remembered how my mom used to call me her good boy, but only when she needed something. I remembered how my dad once told me, "You're not like your brother. You'll always land on your feet." That was his way of saying, "So you can take the hit for us." That morning, something in me changed. Call it clarity. Call it being done. But for once, I didn't second-guess the decision. I opened my bank app, canceled the auto payment to their rent account, and stopped the monthly transfer. Then I logged into the car's tracking app. It was still under my name after all, and saw it was parked outside their apartment. 20 minutes later, I was downstairs driving over to pick it up. When I pulled into the lot, Zach was sitting on the hood, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as I approached and gave me this confused half-smile. "Yo, Jules, you bringing me food or something?" "No," I said simply, holding out my hand. "Keys." He blinked. "What? The car? I'm taking it back." "You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking?" He laughed nervously, still waiting for the punchline. "Dude, come on. I've got work in an hour. You can take the bus." He stood suddenly defensive. Seriously? Over a stupid birthday? I stared at him. No, not over a birthday. Over everything. He muttered something under his breath and tossed me the keys. I didn't say another word. I got in the car and drove it straight to my mechanic friend who owed me a favor. Told him to change the plates and store it for a while. Then I made one more stop. The leasing office. The apartment they were living in was leased under my name. When I'd signed it, they were 3 months behind on rent and 2 weeks from eviction. I had the paperwork, the signature, everything. So, I walked in, smiled at the receptionist and said, "Hi, I'd like to terminate my lease. Effective immediately." The look she gave me was confused. "Sir, are you sure? The lease has another 6 months." "I'm aware. I'm also aware I'm the only one who's been paying for it. I won't be anymore." There was some red tape, of course. Legal forms, early termination fees. I paid the fees on the spot. Felt like paying for peace. That night, I changed the locks on my condo. The spare key they had, useless now. I also texted the building management to remove their names from the emergency contact list and revoke any guest access they might have had. Then I went home, grabbed a drink, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, my phone lit up with a stream of messages. First it was Zach, then Mom, then Dad. I didn't open them right away. I wanted to savor this. After half an hour, curiosity went out and I finally tapped one open. "Julian, what is going on? We're locked out of the apartment." Another one came in seconds later. "Why is the car gone? I had work today." Then one from Mom. "This isn't funny, Julian. You're being cruel and immature. We're your family." I scrolled through them, watching the tone shift from confusion to anger to desperation. No apologies, though, just blame, accusations, demands like I owed them something, like I'd broken a sacred contract none of us ever actually signed. And then I got a call. It was Mom. I stared at the screen for a while before answering. Her voice was sharp. "What have you done?" I took a deep breath. "I stopped being your bank." "Julian, this isn't you. You're better than this." "No, Mom," I said, my voice calm. "I just finally realized I deserve better than this." She scoffed into the phone like I'd told her the sky was purple. "Deserve?" she repeated. The way someone might repeat a line they think is laughably stupid. "We're your family, Julian. We raised you." I didn't flinch. "And I repaid that 100 times over. I've been paying your bills for years. I bought your groceries, paid Zach's tuition." "That was your choice," she snapped. There it was, the line I've been waiting for. The one that made my stomach twist with that sharp, bitter mix of vindication and heartbreak. "You never asked us not to take the money," she added coldly. "You just gave it." I let the silence stretch because what do you even say to that? When I didn't answer, she launched into a monologue like she'd been rehearsing it in the mirror for weeks. "You've always acted like you're better than the rest of us. Just because you got out, just because you have some fancy job and a girlfriend who looks down on us. You think that means you can cut us off whenever you feel like it? We needed that money, Julian. Your father is still recovering from surgery. Zach is work. And I have enough stress without you pulling some self-righteous pity act over your birthday." She emphasized the word like it was poison in her mouth. "You're right," I said quietly. "You do have stress, but that stress is yours now, not mine." I ended the call. I won't lie, my hands were shaking. My stomach felt like it was twisting in knots. Because even after everything she said, even after the years of manipulation, there was still a part of me. The old part that wanted to go back. The part that was terrified of being alone, of being labeled the selfish one, the ungrateful son. But that part of me was dying. And in its place, something else was growing. It wasn't anger. Not anymore. It was resolve. Later that day, I called the leasing office again. Apparently, my family hadn't taken the news well. They were told they had 7 days to vacate. I heard there had been shouting, screaming. Zach had threatened legal action. My dad said something about suing me for abandonment, which made the receptionist laugh awkwardly over the phone. "They don't really have a case," she assured me. "Your name's on the lease, not theirs. They're technically squatters now." I thanked her and hung up. Then I opened the family group chat again. something I hadn't done since the get over it message. It was filled with unread messages. Zach had written, "You're seriously kicking us out? You're insane, bro." My dad had added, "After everything we did for you, everything we gave up, this is how you repay us." There were even a few from relatives I barely spoke to, probably dragged into it by my mom. One aunt wrote, "You really should be ashamed of yourself. Your mother is in tears." I typed slowly and deliberately, "None of you were there for me. Not on my birthday. Not for years. You used me. That ends now." And I left the group. I turned off my phone after that. Took a walk to clear my head. No destination in mind. Just wandering through the streets, feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I'd finally done something for me. Heavier because, well, it was still my family. Or at least it had been. When I got home, I found a voicemail waiting. It was from Zach. "Look, I get that you're mad. Okay, but this is next level. You can't just throw us out and take the car. I had a date this weekend. What am I supposed to drive? A scooter." There was a pause. Then quieter. "Mom's not doing well, man. She keeps saying she failed as a mother. That you hate her." I stared at the screen, unmoved. They were finally feeling something. Not guilt, but discomfort. The sting of consequences. The first real taste of life without me as their unpaid lifeline. And yet, still not a single apology. Not one, "We're sorry we forgot your birthday." Not one, "We didn't realize how much we were taking from you." Not one, "You deserved better." Just whining, just more entitlement, just guilt dressed up as concern. That weekend, my girlfriend and I went out of town. No phones, no notifications. We rented a cabin by the lake and made pancakes in the morning. I told her everything. Every moment I'd swallowed growing up. Every time I let myself believe I didn't matter as long as I kept the peace. She didn't say much, just help me. That silence was louder than anything my family had screamed in years. When we got back, I finally sat down at my desk and wrote a single email. Not to my parents, not to Zach, but to their landlord, confirming again in writing that I had terminated the lease and that I was not responsible for any damages caused after the end date. It felt like erasing my name from a crime scene. I hadn't heard from any of them in 3 days. And then Monday morning rolled around. I was sipping coffee, scanning through emails, when I saw a name I hadn't expected to see pop up again. Not my mom, not Zach, not my dad, but my aunt. The same one who'd said, "You should be ashamed of yourself." Subject line, "Can we talk?" I clicked it open, expecting another rant. But what I read, that changed everything. The email was short. 3 lines, no greeting, no signature. "Your mom told us everything. I'm not taking sides, but there's more going on than you know. Please call me. This isn't just about your birthday, Aunt Marcia." I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or just delete it. The same woman who'd accused me of being heartless was now sending cryptic emails like she was suddenly Switzerland. Not taking sides. Really, I almost ignored it. Almost. But something about that phrase, "There's more going on than you know," nagged at me. I hate riddles. Always have, especially when they come wrapped in family drama. So I called her just once. No voicemail, no text, no long dramatic intro. She picked up on the second ring. "Julian," she said like she'd been waiting. "I got your email," I said flatly. "This better not be some emotional ambush." There was a long pause followed by a sigh. "No ambush," she said. "Just some things I think you deserve to hear." I didn't respond. I let her keep talking. She started slow, careful, like she wasn't sure how much I already knew. It started with money. Apparently, the money I'd been sending, it wasn't all going to bills. My mom had been pocketing a chunk of it every month. Not saving, not using it for groceries or Zach school like she always claimed. She'd been loaning it out to friends, to church acquaintances, even to some cousin I barely remembered, claiming it was her side income. When people paid her back with interest, she told everyone it was money she'd made from smart investing. "You're kidding," I said quietly, not even sure who I was talking to anymore. "I'm not," Marcia said. And that's not the worst of it. Apparently, a few months back, my mom had started bragging that she was going to help Zach buy a car. Not use one, own one. A down payment, she said, so he can get some independence. That car, the one I just reclaimed, she was planning to gift it to him officially on his birthday with a fake bow and everything. The kicker? She was going to say it was from her and Dad, with my name still on the registration. My stomach turned. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I told her it was wrong, Marcia said. I told her months ago. She just shrugged and said, he won't care. He's got more than enough. I was silent. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me, like I'd been the ATM and the punchline Allen one. She used you, Marca continued. All of you did, honestly, but her the worst. And now that you've cut her off, she's spiraling. That's why she's dragging the rest of us into it. She wants sympathy, leverage. I thought you should know what really happened. For the first time in years, I had no words. Just this eerie buzzing quiet in my mind. Like a fog machine had been cleared out and I could finally see everything for what it was. Thank you, I finally said. I'm sorry it took this long, she replied. I should have told you sooner. We hung up. I sat there in silence for a long time, watching the cursor blink in my inbox. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I considered writing back to the family group chat, but I'd already left it. I considered calling my mom, but the sound of her voice felt like poison now. Instead, I opened a document. I started writing down everything. Dates, amounts, payments, texts. I gathered receipts. I pulled bank records. Call it paranoia. Call it preparation. I didn't trust them not to come after me. Not to spin this into a soba story that made me the villain. But mostly, I needed it for myself. I needed proof that I hadn't imagined all of it. That I hadn't made this mess up in my head. That I wasn't crazy for cutting off people who treated me like a resource instead of a son. Later that night, my girlfriend came home and found me at my desk surrounded by papers and spreadsheets. Are you okay? She asked. I looked up at her and smiled for the first time that day. Yeah, I said. I'm just cleaning house. The next morning, I woke up to a new email. This time it was from my mother. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even apologetic. It was worse. I know what you've been told. It's not the full story. I think we should sit down. Just you and me. No yelling. Just talking. You'll understand when I explain, please. There was no subject line. No love, Mom. Just that. And despite everything, my fingers hovered over the reply button for a full minute. I don't know why. Maybe part of me still wanted to believe there was a version of this story where she didn't mean to hurt me, where it was all just a misunderstanding or a string of bad choices she made with good intentions. But I knew better. Deep down, I knew. I closed the email. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it when they come back, because something told me they weren't done. I waited exactly 3 days before I responded to my mother's email. Not because I needed time to think. My mind had been made up the moment I read it, but because I wanted her to feel the same silence she'd always used to punish me. The same cold nothingness I felt every time she ignored me unless she needed something. I let her stew in uncertainty. I wanted her to know what it was like to send a message into the void and wonder if it would ever be answered. When I finally did reply, I kept it brief. We don't need to meet. I already understand. You only call me when I'm useful. That ends now. That was it. No love, no soft ending, no opening for a conversation. I sent it and blocked her email. Then I blocked Zach's, then Dad's. One by one, I removed the last access points they had to me. I even changed my phone number the next day. I didn't tell them where I moved yet. I moved. I've been thinking about it for months. My lease was nearly up and the condo was starting to feel like a museum filled with memories I didn't want to relive. Every time I opened my closet and saw the Christmas sweater Mom mailed me 3 years ago, I remembered how she told me I looked a little fat in the family photo. Every time I used the extra bedroom, I thought about how Zach crashed there for just 2 weeks and stayed 4 months rent-free. So, I packed up, found a new place in a quieter neighborhood, bigger kitchen, a backyard for the dog I always said I'd get. Fresh start. The day I handed over the keys to my old condo, I felt this strange mix of freedom and grief. Like I was mourning a version of myself I was finally ready to bury. The loyal son, the people pleaser, the peacekeeper, the guy who swallowed every insult with a smile and wrote the check. Anyway, that guy was gone. My girlfriend moved in with me a few weeks later. We didn't make a big deal of it. She just showed up one Saturday with 3 duffel bags, a plant, and a smile that said, "I'm in this with you." And that was enough. We painted the guest room a warm navy blue, hung up shelves, bought matching mugs. For once, everything in my home felt like mine. Not borrowed, not conditional, not bought with guilt. Then one night in early spring, something strange happened. A certified letter arrived at my new address. No return name, just a typed label. I opened it slowly, half expecting legal drama. Maybe Zach trying to sue me for emotional distress or some nonsense about unlawful eviction. But what I found was worse in a way. It was a letter from my dad, handwritten, neatly folded on paper with the church logo in the top right corner. The same church where my mother volunteered, where Zach occasionally posed for holiday photos to make it look like he was turning his life around. "Julian, your mother doesn't know I'm writing this. She wouldn't approve, but I couldn't let things in the way they have. I know I haven't always been the father you needed, and I know we leaned on you too hard for too long. That's on us. But you've made your point. We're struggling now. You got what you wanted." That line made my blood boil. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do hope someday you'll remember where you came from. We're not perfect, but we're still your family. Dad do. I didn't show it to my girlfriend. I didn't respond. I just burned it in the fire pit we'd built in the backyard the week before. I watched the paper curl and blacken and finally disappear. Felt symbolic. Not angry, not vengeful, just final. That summer, Zach messaged my girlfriend on Instagram. He had the nerve to reach her when he realized I'd blocked him everywhere. "Hey, tell Julian we're selling Mom's wedding ring to make rent. He can at least buy that back." She didn't reply. She showed me the message, then blocked him too. We sat on the porch that night sipping iced tea, watching the sunset. "Do you think they'll ever stop trying to reach you?" she asked. I thought about it for a while. "No," I said, "but I'll stop hearing them," and I did. Months passed. Then a year. I started therapy. It helped more than I expected. I talked about the things I'd never said out loud before. The time Mom said I was too emotional when I cried in 4th grade. The way Dad only called when something broke. The hollow birthday text sent 4 hours late with no punctuation. No warmth. I grieved the family I never really had. I reconnected with people who mattered. College friends, coworkers, my mentor from my first tech job who once told me, "Your kindness is your greatest asset, but don't let people weaponize it against you." I got promoted, bought a second car. Not for anyone else this time, just because I wanted one. That October, I threw myself a birthday party. First one in years. I rented out a rooftop lounge, invited 20 people, catered the food, had music, lights, cake with my name on it. No one forgot. No one acted like they were doing me a favor by showing up. Halfway through the night, I stood on the edge of the rooftop looking out over the city, and I felt this strange tightness in my chest. It wasn't sadness. It was peace. Later, I got a text from an unknown number. "I saw photos. I hope you're happy. We're barely getting by and you're out there throwing parties." I blocked it without a word because I was happy. For once in my life, I was surrounded by people who didn't need me to suffer so they could thrive. I didn't need them to suffer either. I just needed them gone, and they were. A year later, I legally removed them as emergency contacts, changed the beneficiaries on my accounts, had my lawyer update my will. If anything ever happened to me, they'd never see a cent. Not out of spite, out of clarity, out of choice. My story doesn't end with a dramatic confrontation. There was no teary reunion. No last-minute change of heart, just silence. The kind of silence that fills up the space where chaos used to live. And honestly, that silence is the sweetest sound I've ever heard. Now on to the next story. Story 6. I never thought something as simple as Thanksgiving could reveal so much about my family. To the outside world, we looked like any other close-knit family. Holidays together, shared memories, the occasional bickering over dinner. But behind the scenes, well, that's a different story, one I'm finally ready to tell. My name's Caleb. I'm the middle child in a family of 5, which, let's be honest, often means I got overlooked. My older brother Daniel was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Rachel, my younger sister, was the baby of the family, and while she might not have gotten the same amount of attention, she was spoiled in her own way. And then there was me, the one who just blended into the background, unnoticed by everyone. Thanksgiving this year was supposed to be different. Mom had told us a few weeks earlier that the holiday would be a bit more low-key this time around. "We're cutting back, you know how it is," she said. "With the budget issues and everything, we won't be doing a big feast, but we'll still make sure to spend the day together. It'll be nice." I didn't mind. I was used to the budget talk. In fact, I wanted to believe it. Maybe we could just have a quiet dinner at home, the 3 of us, and keep things simple. I thought it would be a good chance to actually spend time together as a family without the usual drama of Rachel and Daniel fighting over who gets the last piece of turkey. But then, the day before Thanksgiving, I got a message from Mom. "Hey Caleb, we're going to cancel dinner tomorrow. Things are tight and everyone is staying home. Hope you understand. We'll do something next year." I read the message twice just to make sure I wasn't missing something. Cancel dinner? Wasn't that a little extreme? I mean, sure, money was tight, but we've had rough years before and it was never a reason to just skip the holiday. But I thought, okay, whatever. If they don't want to do it, I'll just stay home and relax. I didn't think much of it after that. But as the evening rolled in, something about the whole situation felt off. Maybe it was because I knew how much Mom had loved Thanksgiving in the past. Maybe it was the odd way she worded the message, like she was trying to make sure I wouldn't question it. The next morning, I woke up to find my phone buzzing. Instagram. Rachel had posted a picture of a beautifully laid out dinner table, candles, turkey, the works. The caption read, "So thankful for this family," with a red heart, and tagged Mom, Dad, and Daniel. My heart sank. I froze, staring at the picture, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Rachel had been at Thanksgiving. A beautiful, perfect Thanksgiving dinner. Just like that, I didn't even think twice. I grabbed my jacket, slipped my shoes on, and drove over to Rachel's house. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I had to know. Was this a mistake? Had I been left out again? Were they trying to make me feel like I wasn't part of the family? I arrived at her house about 20 minutes later. The car in the driveway was Mom's. The one next to it was Daniel's. They were all there. The whole family gathered around, pretending they had canceled Thanksgiving for me when, in reality, they'd gone ahead without me. I walked up to the front door, my hands clenched into fists. I knocked, the sound echoing louder than it should have. Rachel opened the door, smiling like she had no idea what I'd seen. "Oh, hey Caleb, come on in." Her voice sounded too cheerful, too forced. I stood there for a second, trying to gather myself. I could feel my pulse racing, but I refused to let them see that I was upset. "Hey," I said, my voice steady. "I thought you all weren't celebrating Thanksgiving this year." Her smile faltered, just for a moment. "What do you mean?" she asked, her eyes darting away from mine. I stepped inside, my gaze sweeping over the grand spread of food. The table was full. There was turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, green beans, and pies. I could smell the richness of it all in the air. This wasn't a simple dinner. This was the kind of meal you only had when everything was perfect. I took a slow breath, staring at the feast. Then I turned to Rachel, who was still standing by the door. Mom texted me. She said Thanksgiving was canceled because of budget issues. Everyone was staying home, I said calmly. But it doesn't look like that's what happened here. Rachel blinked a few times, her mouth opening and closing as if she was trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. "Where is everyone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She hesitated, then gestured to the living room where Mom and Dad were sitting on the couch chatting. Daniel was already at the table, digging into his plate of food. I walked in, my eyes never leaving Rachel. She stood there watching me as I made my way toward the couch. "Hey Mom," I said, forcing a smile though my stomach churned. I thought we weren't doing anything for Thanksgiving this year. Mom looked up from her plate, a flash of guilt crossing her face before she quickly masked it with a smile. Oh, Caleb, sweetheart, she said in her sweetest tone. We just couldn't cancel this year. You know how it is. We wanted to do something special for Daniel and Rachel. The words stung like a slap in the face. So you all just decided to go ahead and have this without me? Huh? She blinked, her eyes widening slightly, but she tried to laugh it off. It's not like that. We just thought you were too busy with work and didn't want to come, with everything going on. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. Right? I see. I guess I didn't realize that family only counts if you're the right kind of family member. Huh. I heard Daniel snort from the table, and my eyes snapped to him. What's so funny? He shrugged, a smirk tugging at his lips. Nothing. Just the usual drama. Mom shot him a glare, but she didn't speak up. I wasn't going to let this go. Couldn't. So I said slowly, my eyes locking onto hers. You decided to cancel Thanksgiving for me, but then went ahead and did it anyway without even telling me. Was I really that much of an inconvenience? Mom's smile faltered, and for the first time, I saw her try to mask the guilt. It wasn't like that at all, Caleb. We didn't want to hurt your feelings. I stared at her, my mind racing. How could they do this to me? All the lies, the manipulation, the way they'd made me feel like I was some afterthought. But I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to make this easy for them. I get it now, I said, turning around to leave. You don't want me here, but at least be honest about it next time. And just before I stepped out the door, I heard Rachel call after me, Caleb, wait! But I didn't turn around. And that was only the beginning. I didn't look back when I walked out the door. Honestly, I didn't even know where I was going at that point. I just needed space to think. It wasn't just about Thanksgiving anymore. It wasn't just about being left out of a family dinner. It was the lies, the manipulation, the way they'd always acted like my time, my presence, wasn't worth as much as anyone else's. As I drove home, I could feel the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had been there for them for so long, helping with bills when Dad's work had slowed down, babysitting Rachel's kids every time she needed a break. I'd even taken out a loan to buy Mom and Dad the car they'd been eyeing for months, something they desperately needed since their old one was falling apart. They had been talking about it for a while, and I thought it would be a good way to show them I cared. But that day, as I sat in my car, the harsh reality of what they had done hit me like a punch to the gut. The car? No. The gift suddenly felt like a mistake. Why should I continue helping people who so clearly didn't care about me? It was like I was invisible to them unless they needed something. And this Thanksgiving fiasco? It wasn't the first time they'd made me feel small. I made a decision right there. I wasn't going to buy that car anymore. I was done playing the role of the obedient son, the one who cleaned up their messes, the one they could always count on when things got tough. They could figure it out on their own for once. I picked up my phone and sent a text to the dealership I had put a down payment on the car with, but they hadn't processed the full paperwork yet. Cancel the order. I'm no longer interested in purchasing the car. I stared at the screen for a moment, the finality of it sinking in. Felt good. Liberating, even. For the first time, I felt like I was taking control of my life. They would have to figure things out like everyone else. The next day, Mom called me. I'd been expecting it. My phone lit up with her name, and I let it ring a few times before answering. Caleb, she said, her voice softer than it had been when I'd left the night before. What's going on? I haven't heard from you since yesterday. I didn't want to let my emotions get the best of me, but I could feel the anger rising in my chest. Oh, nothing much. Just thinking about things. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, like she was trying to figure out how to handle this. I know things were a little tense last night, but we didn't mean to hurt your feelings. It's just that you're so busy all the time. We thought it was better not to make you feel guilty. I clenched my jaw. So you lied to me. You made me think we were all staying home. You didn't even invite me. I'm not stupid, Mom. She hesitated again, like she was going to explain herself. But then the conversation took a turn I wasn't expecting. Caleb? About the car. What's going on? We heard you canceled it. I could feel my stomach drop. So they'd heard already. Yeah, I did, I said, trying to keep my tone even. I don't think I want to buy it anymore. There was a long silence. Then she asked, why? I wanted to tell her everything. The lies, the manipulation, how it felt like I was always the last option. The person they went to when everyone else turned their backs on them. But I couldn't bring myself to say it. Not yet. I don't think it's the right time, I said instead, my voice cold. She didn't buy it. I could hear the sharpness in her tone when she responded. You're not going to do this now, are you? After everything we've done for you. I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I held it in. I had made a choice and now I had to stick to it. I'm sorry, but I think it's better this way. Mom's voice cracked just slightly as she said, you really don't want to help us anymore, do you? I wasn't sure if I was more hurt or angry. It was like she was using guilt to manipulate me again, the same way she'd always done. But I wasn't falling for it. No, I don't, I said, surprising even myself with the finality in my voice. I'm done. There was another silence, but this one felt different. This one was heavy. When she spoke again, it wasn't the motherly sweet tone she always used. It was sharper, more demanding. You can't just throw everything away like this, Caleb. You owe us. We're family. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. I'm sorry, but I can't keep pretending everything's okay. You never asked if I wanted to be part of the family. You just expected me to be there when you needed me. And I'm done with it. The line went silent again, and for a moment, I thought she was going to hang up on me. But then, just as I was about to say something else, I heard her voice. Fine, don't help us. But don't expect us to be there for you when you need something, either. I almost laughed at that. I guess we'll see, won't we? And with that, I hung up the phone. I was done. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. The next time I saw Mom and Dad, it was at a family gathering. It wasn't even a big event, just a random Sunday afternoon when they thought we could all get together to talk things through. But as soon as I walked in, I could tell something was off. Mom and Dad were sitting at the kitchen table. Their eyes narrowed as they watched me walk in. Daniel and Rachel were already there, but they didn't look at me. Caleb, Dad said, his voice stiff. We need to talk. I didn't sit down. Instead, I stood by the door, arms crossed. What is there to talk about? Mom's voice was tight. You've really let us down this time, Caleb. We thought you were the responsible one. We thought you understood family. I raised an eyebrow. That's rich coming from you. Rachel scoffed from the side. Don't start, Caleb. You're the one who's being dramatic. You should have told us what was really going on. Caleb, Daniel added, his voice dripping with annoyance. But no, you had to make everything about you. I felt my blood start to boil. How was I the one being selfish here? It wasn't me who had canceled the Thanksgiving dinner and lied about it. I didn't think I had to explain myself, I said, my tone icy. But if you want the truth, I'm tired of being the one who cleans up your messes. I'm done being the fallback. I'm done. Mom's face twisted with something between guilt and anger. You're being unreasonable. I don't think so, I said. You just don't like it when I stand up for myself. Do you? Don't make this harder than it has to be, she snapped. You'll regret this, Caleb. You're throwing everything away. Everything. I'm not throwing anything away, I said. I'm just deciding to stop giving when I get nothing in return. But you'll figure that out when it's too late. And just like that, the walls between us were solidified. The days that followed felt like walking through thick fog. Every time I picked up my phone, there were missed calls, voicemails, and texts from Mom and Dad. They were desperate. Desperate to get me back on their side. Desperate to undo what I'd done. But the more they tried, the more I realized just how much they depended on me for their comfort, their stability. And I wasn't going to let that guilt trip me into returning to the same toxic pattern. One evening, a few days after that uncomfortable gathering at their house, I got a text from Mom. We're so sorry, Caleb. We've been under a lot of stress lately. We just wanted to keep things simple. Can we talk? I didn't respond. I stared at the text for what felt like an eternity, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. What was there to say? They hadn't changed. They never would. But still, the familiar pang of guilt twisted in my stomach. I'd always been the one to hold the family together, the one who kept things from falling apart. But now, standing firm in my decision, I ignored that nagging voice. The next morning, Mom showed up at my door. I wasn't surprised. It was their way of breaking down my walls, forcing me to see their side. She had a way of making her problems feel like mine, wrapping them up in a way that made me feel like I owed her an explanation. I opened the door, my arms crossed. "What's going on?" She looked tired and small. She forced a smile. "I just wanted to come and talk. I know you're upset, but we can work through this. Please, Caleb. We're your family. We need you." I couldn't believe how easily she slid into her victim role. But I didn't let it show. "You need me? Is that how you see it?" Her eyes welled up. "You've always been the one who understood, Caleb. You were the one I could count on when everything else fell apart. But now you're shutting me out, and I don't understand why." The words stung, but I couldn't let her win this time. "Maybe it's because you've never really seen me. You've always used me, my time, my money, my effort. Like I'm just supposed to drop everything when you need something. I'm tired of being your safety net, Mom." She wiped her eyes, a slow tear sliding down her cheek. "Please, Caleb, I'm not trying to use you. I don't know how to handle everything anymore. The bills, your dad's health. It's too much for me. I just want things to be like they were. I miss my son." I almost gave in. I could see it, the desperation, the fear of losing me. It was all right there in the way she clung to her words, in the way she made everything sound like it was falling apart without me. But I had to remind myself of what I had already seen. The games, the manipulation, the way they always made me feel like I was the one who had to hold it all together. "No, Mom," I said, shaking my head. "You don't get it. This isn't about me. It's about you and the way you treat me. You only see me when it's convenient for you. I'm not just your backup plan anymore. I can't be." Her expression faltered. I could tell it hurt her, but I couldn't care anymore. This wasn't about fixing her. This was about fixing me. But she didn't back off. Instead, she tried a different tactic. "Please, Caleb, you know we've always taken care of you. And now, when we need you most, you're turning your back on us? Is this really how you want things to be?" It wasn't lost on me that the "we've always taken care of you" line was the same one she had always used when she needed me to bend. It was a guilt trap, a way to make me feel like I owed them even though I was the one who'd been there through thick and thin. And then, just when I thought she couldn't pull out any more stops, she dropped the bomb. "Your dad. He's really struggling, Caleb. The doctor said he might need surgery soon. He's not doing well. Don't you want to be there for him?" That hit harder than I thought it would. The guilt started creeping in. Dad's health wasn't something I could ignore, and the thought of him going through something serious without me there, I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to be the one who wasn't there when they needed me most. But then I remembered. They had lied. They had lied to me about Thanksgiving, about everything. They didn't care about my feelings, not really. They wanted me to do their bidding, and I couldn't fall into that trap again. I took a deep breath. "I'm not going to keep sacrificing myself for you, Mom. Not like this. I've been through this before, and I'm not doing it again. If you want to fix things, you're going to have to do it without me." Her face turned pale. She had nothing left to say, no more cards to play. Her hand had been exposed, and she knew it. She stood there for a moment, and for a second I thought she might just break down and beg me to help. But she didn't. Instead, she straightened up, her posture stiffening. "Fine, if that's what you want. Just don't come crying to me when you need something. Don't expect me to be there when you realize you've thrown everything away." I stared at her, my chest tight. I already made my decision. With that, she turned and walked away. But before she left, she gave me one last look. One last desperate glance, as if she were hoping I'd change my mind. I didn't. The days after that felt like I was walking a tightrope, balancing between the guilt of cutting ties and the relief of finally standing up for myself. But it didn't take long for me to realize they weren't done yet. A few days later, Rachel called me. Caleb, you've really screwed things up. Mom and Dad are in pieces right now. You're breaking their hearts. Are you really going to keep pushing them away? I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Rachel, you know exactly what's going on. You've always been part of this. You've watched it happen. But I'm done. I'm not their backup anymore. Don't you dare hang this over us. Rachel snapped. They've always been there for you. You can't just throw everything away because you're mad about Thanksgiving. I'm not just mad about Thanksgiving, Rachel, I said, my voice firm. I'm done being manipulated. You don't get to treat me like I'm nothing, and then expect me to show up when it's convenient for you. She was silent for a moment, probably taken aback by my tone. You're making a huge mistake, Caleb. Just wait. You'll see. And I did. I saw exactly what was coming next. They weren't going to give up so easily. The desperation would only get worse, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. But I had made my choice. I wasn't turning back. Not this time. The next few weeks were a blur of texts, calls, and unexpected visits from family members. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had something to say about my decision. But none of them really understood what it was like to always be the one holding everything together. It was exhausting. They had all expected me to just keep coming back to the fold when things got tough. But I wasn't going to. It was a cold Saturday afternoon when Mom showed up at my door again. I wasn't surprised to see her. She had this way of just showing up, no warning, no preparation. It was like she thought if she kept pushing, I'd eventually give in. I opened the door, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. I could see it in her eyes. This strange mix of anger, hurt, and something else. Desperation. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice cracking slightly. I can't do this, Caleb. I can't keep pretending like everything's fine. Your dad's health is getting worse, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore. I'm sorry. I know we've messed up, but you're my son. I need you. Felt like a punch to the gut. The old me would have folded. The old me would have rushed to comfort her, to fix everything. But I wasn't that person anymore. Mom, I began, my voice steady. I can't keep sacrificing myself just because you need me. I've been doing it my whole life, and I can't anymore. You say you need me, but you're not seeing what's best for me. You never have. She stayed silent, letting the weight of my words settle in the air between us. Finally, she stepped back, her shoulders slumping. So this is it? You're really going to leave us like this? I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that had led up to this moment. It was clear there was no going back. Not this time. I'm not leaving you, Mom, I said quietly. I'm just finally standing up for myself for the first time in my life. She didn't say anything after that. She just walked away, leaving me standing there, wondering if she would ever truly understand what I'd done. A few days later, I got a message from Rachel. Mom's asking if you've seen the pictures of the new car. She wants to know why you didn't help. I stared at the message for a while, trying to figure out what to do with it. There it was again, another attempt to make me feel guilty to get me back in line. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. That's when I made the final decision. I took the money I had saved for a new car for them and used it to buy myself something that felt right for me. It wasn't a luxury car, nothing too flashy. But it was mine. Something I could be proud of. Something that didn't feel like I was bending to their will. It was my way of taking back control. I spent the rest of the evening with friends, celebrating the fact that, for once, I was putting myself first. It felt strange, almost foreign at first, but then, as I relaxed into it, it felt like freedom. And that's how it ended. Mom and Dad, they never apologized. They never came to terms with what happened. But it didn't matter anymore. I had set boundaries, and though they weren't happy about it, I wasn't going to let their anger or disappointment control me any longer. So what do you all think? Did I do the right thing by finally standing up for myself, or should I have tried harder to work things out with them? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Now on to the next story. Story 7. On my son's birthday, I whispered, "Where's his cake?" Dad said, We don't waste money on kids who aren't special. My brother laughed. He doesn't deserve one anyway. I packed up and left. 48 hours later, my brother begged. I need $20,000 for rent. I smiled and announced the real news. I used to think my family had issues, but I never thought they'd sink this low, especially not on my son's birthday. My son turned 6 this year. A sweet, sensitive kid who still draws robots with 3 arms and thinks dinosaurs can come back if we just believe hard enough. I told him this birthday would be special. I promised him cake, games, family, and a surprise gift he'd been eyeing for months. I had the whole thing planned down to the color of balloons, but then my parents called and said they wanted to do it. They said they already had everything in motion. Decorations, food, a magician even. I hesitated, but I'd been raised to believe that letting people help was part of keeping peace. My parents rarely offered anything voluntarily, so when they insisted, I let go of control and said yes. What I didn't know was that their idea of help came with an expiration date and a grudge. See, 2 weeks before all this, my brother Jake came to me asking for $15,000. Said his business was drowning. I'd heard that before. Every few months it was something. First it was crypto, then a lawn care startup, then custom sneaker reselling. Every time he needed just a little boost to get things off the ground. Every time I helped, it vanished. This time I said no, calmly, politely. I told him I couldn't be his safety net anymore and that I had to focus on my son. He didn't respond well. Called me selfish. Said I owed him. That if he hadn't vouched for me with Dad back in the day, I'd be nothing. That was the last I heard from him until the birthday. When we arrived at my parents' house, my son clutched the handmade card he'd drawn for Grandpa. He was wearing the shirt he picked out himself, a blue one with stars and spaceships. He was bouncing on his toes, excited. The house was silent. No balloons, no music, no tablecloth. Nothing that even slightly resembled a child's birthday. Just my dad at the table with a beer, my mom on her tablet, and Jake leaning against the wall with a smirk like he just won a bet. No other kids, no neighbors, just family, if that word still meant anything. My son looked up at me, confused. He whispered, "Where is everyone?" I crouched down and quietly asked my dad where the cake was. He didn't even look up. He just said, "We don't waste money on kids who aren't special." I thought he was joking. I waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. Jake let out a short laugh and added, "He doesn't deserve one anyway." I couldn't speak. My son stood there holding that card like it meant something. He walked up and handed it to my dad, who took it without even looking and set it beside his glass. They handed my son a gift wrapped in crumpled newspaper. Inside was a broken toy car missing a wheel and a half-used coloring book. Literally 2 pages already filled out. Some of the crayons were worn down to nubs. My son still said thank you. That was it for me. I gathered our things without saying a word. No scene, no drama, just a quiet exit. My parents barely looked up. Jake muttered something about me always being overly sensitive. His wife gave me a pitying glance and went back to her phone. We left. The sun was still out when we got in the car. My son asked if we could get a cupcake on the way home. I told him we'd have a real party, just the 2 of us. That night, while he slept with frosting on his cheek and the new toy I bought him hugged against his chest, I opened my laptop and got to work because I'd seen enough. I was done hoping they'd change. I was done trying to mix family and forgiveness with money and business. 48 hours later, Jake called. He said he needed $20,000, not for business this time, but for rent. Said he was behind 3 months and that his landlord was threatening eviction. He didn't even ask how the birthday went. I said, "Hold on," and walked into my office. I pulled out the legal documents I'd been finalizing quietly, preparing for this moment. They thought I was just their bank account with feelings. But I'd been planning something for months. They had no idea what was about to happen next. When Jake called asking for $20,000, he sounded like someone used to getting what he wanted. No shame, no apology, just pressure. Like I owed it to him. Like ruining my son's birthday hadn't even registered. I didn't answer right away. I just let the silence sit. He said he was about to lose his apartment, that his credit was shot, his wife was threatening to leave, and their daughter didn't even have a bed anymore because they sold it last week for grocery money. He kept talking, throwing details at me like darts, hoping one would land. I asked him, "What about that lawn care business?" He said it folded. I asked, "What about the truck Dad co-signed for?" He said it got repossessed. I asked, "What about Mom and Dad?" He said they couldn't help anymore. Said Dad's pension was tied up and Mom didn't want to get involved. That last part was interesting. I told him I'd call him back. I went straight to my safe and pulled out everything. The papers, the contracts, the accounts, all of it. See, for the past 4 years, my parents and Jake had been silent partners in my consulting firm. Not active, not helpful, just leeching off a company they never lifted a finger to build. I gave them shares out of guilt, out of a warped sense of obligation. They always made it sound like they were protecting me by being involved. Really, they were siphoning money. And it hadn't stopped at the business. They used my credit, my name, my goodwill quietly, constantly for years. But I'd been preparing for this. The moment they crossed a line, I couldn't unsee. My lawyer and I had been working behind the scenes to sever every legal tie. It hadn't been easy, but I had a clear goal. I just didn't expect to be pushed over the edge on my son's birthday. That night, I went public. I called an emergency shareholder meeting. My lawyer presented the findings: financial negligence, misuse of company resources, repeated personal withdrawals without consent, and failure to fulfill any operational role. The vote was unanimous. The shares I had given them were revoked. Their access was terminated. The company was mine again, fully wiggly. Next, I froze the joint family account they'd been draining for years. I closed the tab at the private club where my dad had been racking up thousands, and I sent an email to every major client letting them know I was restructuring, cutting out the noise, the dead weight, the distraction. Jake called the next morning screaming. I let it go to voicemail. An hour later, my dad texted one word, "Really?" And then my mom called over and over. I picked up on the 5th try. She didn't ask about her grandson. She didn't ask why. She just asked how I could humiliate the family like this. That's when I told her the truth without sugar. I told her my son deserved better. That I was tired of watching them treat him like a second-class citizen just because he came from me. A woman who didn't beg them for help every 3 months. That I was tired of being the one who built everything only for them to act like they owned it. She went quiet. I hung up. That afternoon, I booked a weekend trip for me and my son. Just the two of us. No guilt, no games. I watched him play in the hotel pool, laughing and splashing. No idea the world had shifted. And I realized something. This was the first time I felt peace in years. But it wasn't over yet. Jake hadn't given up. Jake didn't call again after that last voicemail. Not a single text. Not even one of his passive-aggressive guilt messages. Just silence for about 2 days. Then he showed up at my house. It was Thursday early evening. My son had just finished dinner and was sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, building what he swore was a spaceship, but looked more like a mutant turtle. I was in the kitchen putting leftovers away when the doorbell rang. 3 times, fast and sharp, not like a neighbor, like someone trying to send a message. I already knew. I opened the door and there he was, standing with his hands shoved into the pockets of a stained hoodie, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched so tight I thought he might crack a tooth. For half a second I thought maybe, just maybe, he came to say something real, an apology, a moment of accountability. He pushed past me without a word. Walked straight into the house like he still had a place there, like he belonged. My son looked up from the Legos and smiled, always too kind for his own good. He said, "Hi, Uncle Jake." Jake didn't say a word back. Didn't even look at him. Just stood in the middle of my living room like he was waiting for a crowd to form and take his side. I told him we weren't doing this here. Not in front of my kid. Not now. He said we were. Unless I wanted him to start yelling. Said I'd already ruined his life. And if I thought he was going to walk away quietly, I was wrong. He said he had nothing. That he couldn't make rent, couldn't get credit, couldn't get a job without someone looking at his name and pausing. He said I did that to him. I reminded him I had spent years cleaning up after him. I reminded him that this entire disaster started when I politely said no to yet another bailout. That it wasn't me who buried him. It was his own choices, the constant lies, the way he treated people like resources instead of family. He said I had a responsibility to fix it. I asked him if he remembered what my son looked like 2 days ago, standing in their living room holding that hand-drawn card while everyone ignored him. I asked him if he realized what that would have done to a 6-year-old's heart, if he even cared. He didn't answer that. Instead, he told me I'd regret cutting them off, that someday I'd need help and no one would come, that I wasn't as untouchable as I thought. Then he turned and left, slamming the door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall. I didn't go after him. That night, after my son went to bed, I logged into the business email I rarely used anymore, the one reserved for old clients and direct referrals. There were 3 emails flagged urgent. One of them was from a former client, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. She said Jake had contacted her directly, offered her a better rate if she signed a contract with his consulting group. She forwarded the proposal. It was copy-pasted from one of my own, even used my exact wording and brand colors. But the letterhead was fake, sloppy, his name on top, mine removed, and a fake business address that traced back to a UPS mailbox. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. We'd been sitting on documentation for months. Fraud, unauthorized access, and a string of shady invoice attempts Jake had slipped in during his last few weeks before I locked them out of the company systems. This wasn't new, but this was different. Now he was using my name, my clients, my reputation. I wanted to press charges, but my lawyer asked if I wanted to give him a chance to back off first. I said yes, but only once. So I drafted one email. No emotion, no drama. Subject: final notice. It was a single-page list of every infraction we documented, every client he'd contacted, every login he wasn't supposed to have. I made it clear that any further contact, professional or personal, would trigger formal legal action. I ended the email with one sentence: if you ever contact me or my son again, I will not hesitate. I didn't expect a reply. I didn't get one. But early the next morning, I got a call from my dad. Not angry, not blaming. This time, he sounded different. Panicked. He said something had just happened, something big, and they needed me. Only this time, I wasn't sure I cared. My dad never panics. Even when my mom was rushed to the ER last December, he spoke in that same flat, emotionless tone, like he was reading off a weather report. So when he called me early that morning and I heard his voice shaking, I stopped what I was doing. He asked if I'd done something to the accounts. I played dumb. What accounts? He said everything was frozen. Their personal checking, the trust fund, even the backup account tied to the rental property Jake managed. He said the bank called him at 6 a.m. and told him all activity had been halted pending investigation. He asked again if I had anything to do with it. Here's the thing. I didn't. Not directly. I'd already removed myself from every joint asset. I made sure I had no more access, no more liability. I didn't want even a sliver of connection left after the stunt they pulled at my son's birthday. But I had been watching quietly. A few weeks earlier, my lawyer introduced me to a forensic accountant after I noticed some weird discrepancies in past filings. Just a hunch. Nothing concrete, but something felt off. And she found it buried in years of family tax paperwork and business documents my dad insisted on handling to keep things simple. They had created a secondary account years ago. It was under a family LLC tied loosely to my consulting firm and quietly funneling revenue through it without my knowledge. I never even saw the transfers. They used an old licensing agreement I'd signed in my 20s and stretched it into something it was never meant to be. And Jake, he tried to empty it. According to my dad, the final red flag came when Jake attempted to wire $25,000 to an offshore crypto wallet. It got flagged instantly because Jake didn't have full access, only limited authority tied to his name as a secondary signer. The bank froze everything. Now my parents couldn't even buy groceries without triggering fraud alerts. I asked my dad why he was telling me this now. He said because I needed to fix it. That maybe I still had connections at the bank, that I was smart, resourceful, that I knew how to talk to these people. He said Jake made a mistake. Yes, but he's still family and this mess was hurting everyone. That's when I told him I already knew about the account. That I had discovered it weeks ago. that my accountant had turned it over to the IRS, every detail, every document, and that if there was a fraud investigation now, it had nothing to do with me and everything to do with them. He went silent. I told him this is what happens when you gamble with someone else's life. That I had built something from nothing and they tried to turn it into a piggy bank for failed businesses, vacations, and backyard renovations I never agreed to fund. He hung up without saying another word. I thought that was the end of it. I figured they'd retreat, regroup, maybe come back with a lawyer. But less than an hour later, I got a text from Jake. Just one line. "You really think you won?" I didn't answer because it wasn't about winning. It never was. It was about ending something that should have ended a long time ago. I was about to shut my laptop when another message came through. This time from someone unexpected. Jake's wife. I hadn't heard from her in months. She'd always stayed out of the drama, pretended not to see the chaos as long as the bills got paid. Her message was longer. She asked if we could talk, said she found something, and that I needed to see it. When Jake's wife texted saying she found something, I didn't respond right away. I stared at the message, half thinking it was some new tactic. Maybe she was trying to mediate, maybe bait me into dropping the legal side of things. But then she sent a photo. It was a folder. Thick, stuffed, yellowed edges and worn corners. Inside were receipts, contracts, and handwritten notes. The top sheet had my business name on it, misspelled, but recognizable. Below that, a document with my forged signature. Called her. She answered fast like she'd been waiting. She said she found it cleaning out the hall closet. Jake had left in a rush. Took only one backpack. Didn't even say goodbye to their daughter. She started digging through his things, hoping for clues. Where he went, who he contacted. Instead, she found that folder shoved behind old tax documents and expired insurance forms. She asked if I had a minute to come over. I did. I left my son with a neighbor and drove to their place. Quiet little rental on a street where all the houses looked the same. Her eyes were tired when she opened the door. She didn't say much, just handed me the folder and told me to sit. Inside were years' worth of paper. Jake hadn't just been siphoning money. He had been planning to replace me. There were printed email drafts where he tried to pitch himself as the co-founder of my firm, a fake logo design with his name under mine, even a full investor pitch deck using slides from a presentation I'd given at a conference 2 years ago. I remember that talk. I wore heels that pinched so bad I could barely walk afterward. Jake wasn't even there. There were drafts of contracts he'd never sent. Outlines of deals he tried to negotiate behind my back. The worst part, a blank employment contract using my son's name, a bizarre half-finished attempt to make it look like he was paying family for media consulting. My son was 6. I asked her why she was showing me this now. She said she didn't know what Jake had told me, but she was done covering for him, done being scared of him. She had a daughter to think about. Then she pulled out a second folder. This one had bank statements, personal ones, from an account I'd never seen before. Jake had opened a savings account in my son's name, illegally, without my consent. It had been open for 2 years. He used it to funnel money in and out, probably assuming no one would look too closely at an account under a child's name. At one point, it had over $40,000 in it. Now, it had $12 and change. I took everything, photographed it, logged it, then I called my lawyer. We filed for a formal criminal investigation that night. Forgery, fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized use of a minor's information. The bank was notified. The IRS had already opened a case. Now the authorities would, too. The next morning, Jake called again. This time from a new number, probably a burner phone. I let it go to voicemail. His message, "I'm sorry, I messed up. Please don't do this." I deleted it. That afternoon, I took my son out for ice cream. He laughed the whole way there, no idea that the world around us had finally completely changed. We were free almost because there was one last move I had to make. I gave it 24 hours. Long enough for Jake to realize this wasn't going to blow over. Long enough for my parents to try and talk themselves out of accountability. And long enough for me to feel the difference in my own chest, like someone had cut a weight off me I didn't even know I was dragging. Then I made the final call. It wasn't just about business anymore. That part was done. The shares were revoked. The accounts were sealed. And my company was finally clean. This was personal. It was about cutting the last rotting threads they kept tugging on. Threads I didn't even realize were still attached. I met with my lawyer first thing that morning. We finalized everything. I had my name removed from the family trust. I revoked all financial powers of attorney my parents once held. I submitted documentation severing every joint ownership, every stake they once had in any of my property, vehicles, or financial assets. I filed a cease and desist against Jake. Formal on record. But that wasn't the big one. The big one was the emergency custody plan. See, up until now, in case of something happening to me, custody of my son would have gone to the next of kin. My parents, Jake, would have been next in line. I couldn't believe I let that go unchecked for so long. So I changed it. Every document, every clause. His new guardian in the worst-case scenario would be my best friend. The one person who had never used me, manipulated me, or made me feel small. She cried when I told her, said she was honored. I also had her added to my business succession plan. If anything happened to me, she'd take over the firm temporarily until a trusted board could step in. My son's inheritance was separated, secured, and legally protected from any claim by my family. And then I filed something else, something people rarely think to do. I filed a petition to disassociate from my parents as legal dependents. A rare process, but necessary because they'd already tried to open credit under my name once before. They'd taken out a small insurance policy in case something happened to me, one I never signed off on. That stopped now. All of it. By noon, it was done. Then I changed the name of my company, dropped the family name from the brand, rebranded the logo, the mission statement, the client-facing materials. I had a designer on standby. She'd already mocked up 3 versions. I picked the one with a quiet strength in the typeface. Simple, clean, but firm. New chapter, new name, new rules. I took the rest of the day off. My son and I went out for lunch. His choice. He picked pancakes. We sat in a booth next to the window, syrup everywhere, and he smiled the whole time. At one point, he looked at me and asked, "Do I get 2 birthdays next year?" I laughed. Maybe 3. We spent that weekend driving up to a lake cabin I used to visit as a kid, back before the family dynamics twisted everything. I hadn't been back in over a decade. It was just the 2 of us. He skipped rocks. I made hot cocoa. He fell asleep in front of the fireplace wrapped in a blanket, toy spaceship under one arm. I sat on the porch that night staring out over the water and thought about everything that had happened. How they ruined his birthday just to punish me. How they used me for years, quietly draining and guilt-tripping. How they tried to drag my son into their chaos and failed. And how, finally, I put a stop to it. Not with shouting, not with threats, not even with revenge, with silence, with legal paperwork, with a door that would never be opened again. On Monday, I got a message from my mom. It was one line, "We still love you." I didn't respond. Love without respect isn't love. Love that withholds kindness from a 6-year-old isn't love. Love that's only useful when there's something to gain isn't love. That door stayed closed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. A week after cutting all ties, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address, just my name scribbled in familiar handwriting, my mother's. It wasn't long, 2 pages, but enough to ruin a quiet morning. She wrote that they'd spoken to a lawyer, that they were considering filing for grandparent visitation rights, said they had a bond with my son, and it was unfair for me to take that away. I laughed. The same people who ignored him on his birthday, who watched him thank them for trash gifts with tears in his eyes, who let Jake mock a 6-year-old because they were angry at me. Now they wanted legal access to his life. I handed the letter to my lawyer. She wasn't even surprised. They had no case. No history of caregiving, no pattern of visits, not even a dozen photos together. But we didn't wait. My lawyer filed a motion to block any future attempts. If they tried, they'd be met with court evidence. Receipts, emails, forged documents, bank transfers, all of it. Still, the fact they were trying at all, it hit me harder than I expected. And then came the real surprise. Jake was arrested. It wasn't my doing. Turns out the crypto platform he used to move the stolen money had flagged him months ago. The documents I submitted connected the dots. They picked him up at a gas station outside town living in his car. The charges were serious: identity theft, fraud, wire crime. His wife messaged me again just to say thank you. Said her daughter had started sleeping through the night again. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I took my son out for pancakes that weekend. He smiled the whole time talking about planets and dinosaurs, and I realized we were free. No more threats, no more manipulation, no more apologies I never asked for. Just peace. Real quiet, earned peace, and a future with no shadows. Now on to the next story. Story 8. At Christmas, my parents refused to give gifts to my children. I asked why, and Dad said, "Celebrate Christmas without us. We'd rather celebrate with our real grandkids than with you and these." I culturally told them to shut their mouths and we left. Karma was inevitable in the new year. I wasn't always the outsider in my own family. I always thought we were close. Not perfect, but close. Growing up, my sister Jessica and I fought like any siblings do. But there was still this feeling that we were in it together. That changed slowly and then all at once. Jessica married into money, started a business that took off, and somehow managed to become our parents' favorite without even trying. Or maybe she tried. I wouldn't know. I was too busy raising 2 kids and trying to stay afloat while working a regular job and helping Megan build her photography business from the ground up. My parents started treating Jessica like she was some kind of royalty. Everything she touched turned to gold. Every decision she made was brilliant. Her kids were geniuses. Meanwhile, my kids, Lily and Max, became invisible to her. The weirdest part, my parents weren't subtle about it. The last Christmas, we were invited over. Megan and I went all out. We bought presents for everyone, baked cookies, and even brought an extra set of stockings in case my parents forgot to hang any for our kids like they had the year before. Jessica's twins unwrapped brand new iPads, designer sneakers, and tickets to a VIP Harry Potter tour. Lily opened a plastic makeup kit that still had a sale tag on it. Max got a jigsaw puzzle with cartoon frogs on it. He was 9. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't want to ruin the day. I waited until everyone sat down to eat and pulled my dad aside. I asked him why the presents were so unbalanced, not in an aggressive way, just genuinely wondering what the logic was. He looked at me and said, "Celebrate Christmas without us. We'd rather celebrate with our real grandchildren than with you and these." He didn't even finish the sentence. He just waved his hand like he was done. I told him to shut up. Not yelled. Not dramatic. Just the kind of firmness that makes silence stretch. Megan and I packed the kids' things while Jessica sat there watching, but not saying a word. Michael looked like he wanted to disappear into his scotch glass. On the drive home, Max asked if he'd done anything wrong. That hit harder than anything. We didn't go back the next year or the year after that. Every Christmas since, it's been just the 4 of us. Small, simple, real. What none of us expected was that 5 years later, Jessica would call me out of the blue. Not to say hello, not to catch up. She asked if we wanted to spend Christmas together at our parents' house. I laughed at first. I thought she was joking, but she was serious. She said the boys missed their cousins. She said Mom and Dad were planning to do something nice this year and that maybe it was time. I asked her straight out why now. She paused and then said because things aren't what they seem. I didn't know what she meant, but I agreed. Against every instinct I had, I agreed. I didn't realize then that she was trying to fix something or maybe just preparing us all for what was to come. When Jessica called that November, I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't in the mood for the favor she was about to ask. She hadn't called in over a year, and our last conversation had ended with her telling me to stop acting like a victim. After our parents iced my kids again, but then she texted, just 3 words. "Can we talk?" I sat on it for 2 days before I finally called her back. She answered the first ring and jumped right in as if we'd been in the middle of a conversation. She asked if we had any plans for Christmas and said that our parents wanted to do something special this year. I told her I hadn't spent Christmas with them in 5 years for a reason. She didn't argue. She just said quietly, "I know. That's why I'm asking now. Things are different." I didn't buy it. I wanted to say no. Megan told me I should, but then Jessica added, "The boys miss Lily and Max, and I think they need it more than you know." That took me by surprise. It wasn't something Jessica usually said, anything that suggested vulnerability. So we agreed. Megan was cautious but supportive. The kids were surprisingly enthusiastic. They remembered how things had been, but they also remembered the year we left. They were older now, and we made a deal with them. No expectations. We'd go spend the evening and leave if anything felt wrong. We bought thoughtful gifts. Books that Max had been into lately. A new hoodie that Lily pointed at every time we went to the store. Megan even baked these crazy gingerbread cookies shaped like dinosaurs because Max once said Santa would like something cooler than the regular stuff. Christmas Eve came, and as soon as we pulled into my parents' driveway, I felt that old knot in my chest tighten. The house hadn't changed. Still the white colonial with the same wreath and broken plastic reindeer out front. The kind of place that looks cheerful from the outside. But you know better. Jessica greeted us at the door like someone trying too hard. She hugged me longer than usual and looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't. Her boys ran over to Lily and Max. For a few minutes, everything was almost normal. Inside, the house was decorated to the ceiling, lights everywhere. My mom was showing off like she was getting ready for a magazine shoot. She gave Megan a half hug and said something about how she hadn't aged, which sounded more like a dig than a compliment. Dad didn't say much, just nodded and poured himself a whiskey. Dinner was fine. Tense but fine. My parents made comments here and there about everyone finally being under the same roof again. And Jessica kept deflecting with fake laughs and changing the subject. But then we got to the presents. Jessica's boys opened theirs first. Brand new laptops. I actually chuckled. Couldn't help it. Not because I was mad, just because it was so predictable. Then Lily took the one with her name on it from our parents. It was a calendar from last year, still shrink-wrapped. Max's gift? Another puzzle. A picture of a goat on a rock. He just stared at it. Didn't even open the box. I asked Dad if he was serious. He shrugged. "You said you would bring gifts. We thought that meant you had it covered." I looked at Jessica. Her mouth was slightly open as if she couldn't believe it either. We handed out our gifts, real ones, personalized. I even gave something to my parents, expensive wine that Megan picked up so she wouldn't be accused of holding a grudge. Jessica followed us into the guest room later after the kids were asleep. She didn't knock, just walked in and sat on the edge of the bed, as if she didn't know where else to go. I didn't ask. I just waited. Finally, she said, "I'm getting a divorce." She looked down at her hands. "Michael moved out 3 months ago. We told the boys he was working in another town, but they're not stupid." Then she looked at me and added something I never expected. "I always thought you were jealous of me, but really, you're the one who got it right." She told us things I never thought she'd say. How she was tired of keeping up appearances. How Mom and Dad only saw what they wanted to see and everything else was filtered out. How even when her marriage was falling apart, they were more worried about whether she'd embarrass the family. The twins weren't sleeping well. They were anxious. The younger one, Ryan, was starting to wet the bed again. Jessica said she felt like she was watching everything fall apart while pretending nothing was wrong. And now with Christmas under the same roof again, she was trying to fix something, maybe not for herself but for the kids. That night I realized something I hadn't before. She wasn't calling me because she thought it would make things better. She called me because for once she needed a family, and that was the first unexpected thing that year. There were more to come. I thought the night before had been the height of awkwardness. Jessica's confession, the recycled gifts, the tension so thick it felt like we were all in a pressure cooker. But Christmas morning made it all feel like a warm-up act. We woke up to screams. Not just raised voices, full-on screaming. I opened the bedroom door and heard my dad yelling something about betrayal and manipulation. Then my mom's voice, shrill and panicked, asking if they were really going to do this right now in front of everyone. Megan looked at me. We didn't move. We just listened. Next came Jessica's voice, louder than I'd ever heard it before. She said things I never thought she'd say to them. "You care more about your image than your own grandchildren. You've humiliated David and his children for years, and I let you, but not anymore. And then the kicker. I have already filed. Michael and I are over. And guess what? He cheated for 2 years. Silence. Then my dad said, "You're lying. You wouldn't destroy your family like that. Not unless someone told you to." That's when I heard my name. My father accused me of poisoning Jessica. He said I had always wanted to bring the family down. And now I had finally gotten my revenge. I walked out of the room. Megan tried to stop me, but I wasn't going to stand in the hallway while my name was being thrown around like that. I walked into the living room and everyone froze like someone pulled the power cord on a sitcom. Jessica was standing there in her bathrobe, red-eyed but not crying. My mother was sitting on the couch shaking. My dad was pacing like he'd just been served with court papers. I asked if anyone else was blaming me for Jessica's problems. My mom snapped. She said it wasn't about blame, it was about family loyalty. And then she did something I'll never forget. She pointed to my children, who were in the kitchen eating cereal and watching cartoons, and said, "These children have never been a part of this family in the same way." The room went dead. Even Jessica looked like she couldn't believe what she had just heard. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just walked into the kitchen and told Lily and Max to get their coats. Megan was already behind me with the bags. We were halfway to the car when Jessica ran out barefoot in the snow. "Please don't go." I turned and asked her one thing. "Why now? Why now after all these years?" She said, "Because you were always right. I just didn't want to believe it." And then right there in the driveway in front of my kids, she said something else. She rewrote her will a year ago. Everything goes to my kids. Nothing to yours. I didn't even flinch. I just said, "Sounds about right." And we left. Christmas morning. No presents opened, no goodbyes. But the year wasn't over. And karma apparently works fast. We arrived home that evening. Quiet drive. Max fell asleep before we got on the freeway. Lily had her headphones on the whole way and didn't say much. Megan just kept looking out the window like she was trying to forget everything at once. I spent the next day packing up the Christmas decorations. I didn't feel like leaving them out in January. Megan was in the kitchen trying to salvage the ham we never got to eat. The mood in the house was this strange mixture of relief and disbelief. Then 3 days later, the first phone call came. It was my mother. She didn't start with hello. She said, "Can you come over?" I asked why. She said, "Your father collapsed." I drove over alone. Megan wanted to come, but I told her to stay with the kids. I didn't want her around the mess that was waiting for me over there. When I got to her house, the front door was open. Jessica's car was in the driveway. Inside, my dad was lying on the couch, pale, sweating, and refusing to go to the hospital. Jessica was pacing the dining room. Apparently, he collapsed while taking out the garbage. He hit the side of the garage and went down. I stood there for a minute just watching him. This man who once told me to celebrate Christmas without him, who looked through my children as if they were strangers. Now he was begging me with his eyes not to say "I told you so." I didn't. I just asked if anyone had called for an ambulance. Jessica shook her head, said he refused. So I called one. Simple as that. The paramedics showed up within 15 minutes. My dad was still trying to pretend he didn't need help, but they took him anyway. High blood pressure. Something was wrong with his heart. At the hospital, while we waited for the test results, Jessica and I sat in silence. Then she said, "I think Mom is afraid he's going to die and she's going to have to face what she did alone." I said, "You mean what they both did?" Jessica didn't argue. And then came the next unexpected thing. She reached into her purse and handed me a manila envelope. I opened it. Inside were copies of the revised will, the one she had mentioned on Christmas morning. I skimmed it. Everything: house, savings, investments, divided among her boys. Not even a mention of my kids. Jessica said, "I didn't know about it until last week. I just found it by accident." She never told me. I asked why she showed it to me. Because I told them either they fixed it or I would. I raised my eyebrows. "Fix it how?" She said, "I'll get my own lawyer. You can't treat your family like dirt and then expect me to play along." It was the first time she'd ever drawn a line in the sand like that. I wasn't sure if I believed her yet, but I listened. Then 2 days later, Karma dropped another surprise. My mother called again. This time she asked if we could meet. Not at the house. She said she didn't want Jessica there. I agreed. We met at a diner. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She ordered tea and just stared at it. She said, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I think I've made the biggest mistake of my life." And that's when I realized they weren't just spiraling. They were about to unravel. My mom didn't come right out and say it, but I could tell what she really meant in that diner. The hospital bills were piling up. My dad's insurance didn't cover everything. There were complications with some medications, and the tests they ran turned up more problems than they expected. I sat and listened as she danced around the issue. I didn't interrupt. I just watched her unravel bit by bit until she finally said it. "We're in a little trouble." It was strange to see the woman who had once dismissed my children's birthdays as an afterthought now staring at me with the expression of someone looking for a lifeline. She said Jessica couldn't help right now. That got my attention. I asked, "What do you mean she can't help?" Mom hesitated, then said, "Jessica hasn't told you everything. Things aren't going well for her." At home, I thought about it for a long time. Megan saw the look on my face and didn't even ask what was wrong. She just said, "Whatever you decide, do it for you, not for her." That stayed with me. A week later, I transferred the money, covered the balance from the hospital, and sent enough to get them through the next few months. Not because I owed them, not because they deserved it, but because that's what I wanted my children to see. That we don't repay cruelty with indifference, that doing the right thing isn't about who's watching. My dad didn't thank me. He didn't call. But a few days later, I got a message from Jessica. She asked me to meet her at a coffee shop near her office. I went. She looked tired. Not the usual business owner stress kind of tired, a different kind. She told me that her business was hemorrhaging money, that one of her partners had suddenly pulled out, that Michael hadn't paid a dime in child support since he moved out, and she was drowning in debt. She smiled and said, "I don't think I ever envied you before, but now I do." I didn't know what to say. She said, "You've always had a life that I couldn't buy, and now I'm here asking you how you did it." I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I just said we stopped trying to impress people. She nodded slowly as if the answer hurt more than it should. Back at the hospital, my dad was recovering better than expected. The doctor said it was because he was starting to take things seriously, eating better, less stress. Jessica came to visit once. She didn't stay long, but I came back a couple of times, dropped off books, sat with him, talked about normal stuff, sports, weather, whatever. One day as I was leaving, he said something under his breath. "You're a better man than I gave you credit for." He didn't say it looking at me. He said it as he adjusted his blanket. But I heard it, and somehow it felt louder than all the Christmases he'd ignored us put together. Things were shifting. The man who once told me to celebrate Christmas without him was now relying on me to keep the lights on. And my sister, who had once been the example I was supposed to live up to, couldn't even pay her mortgage. Funny how fast the ground moves when the truth is finally revealed. By mid-January, the air felt different. Not dramatically, just less tense. The kind of calm you get after a storm when no one's quite sure whether to celebrate or just keep their heads down. Jessica had been showing up more. Sometimes she texts Megan asking for help with something small, designing a flyer, organizing photos for a client, stuff like that. Once she dropped off a bag of groceries without saying anything, just leaving it on the porch with a sticky note. "For the best cookies in town." We never talked about the will again, or the Christmas that exploded, or the calendar and the goat puzzle. It was as if the whole family had quietly agreed to shove the wreckage in the back of a closet and pretend we were redecorating. Then toward the end of January, Jessica texted again. "Just dinner. No occasion. I'll cook." I didn't respond right away. Neither did Megan. We waited a day, maybe two. Finally, we said yes. It was a light snow that Saturday. No dramatic scene pulling into the driveway this time. The reindeer decorations were gone. Maybe finally thrown out or maybe buried in the garage. Either way, the house just looked like a house. Jessica answered the door in sweatpants and a hoodie. No makeup, hair in a bun, apron dusted with flour. It was the most normal I'd seen her in years. Inside, the kids were already playing a board game, a loud, ridiculous thing where each round ends in fake arguments and high fives. Megan joined Jessica in the kitchen. I stood awkwardly with my dad in the living room until he said, "You drinking tea now?" I nodded. He disappeared for a minute, then came back and handed me a cup. Mint, no sugar, just the way I liked it when I was 15. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. Dinner was roast chicken, potatoes, and some kind of green bean thing that Jessica kept apologizing for. It was delicious. We all sat down. No tablecloth, no centerpieces, no fancy anything. We talked. Lily talked about a science project she was excited about. Max bragged about beating a 5th grader at chess. Jessica's boys were quieter than usual, but they smiled more. My mother asked Megan for the cookie recipe. That was unexpected. So was Megan's handing it over without a second's hesitation. After dinner, Jessica brought out a store-bought cake that was crooked because she dropped it in the car. We laughed. Then my dad said something that stopped the whole room. "I sold the boat." Everyone looked at him. He'd had the thing for almost a decade. Barely used it, but always talked about fixing it up and sailing it somewhere when the time was right. He said, "I figured maybe the time is already past. Better to put the money into something that's actually going to move forward." Nobody reacted right away. We didn't have to. Later, as we were putting on our coats and the kids were collecting leftover cake and napkins, Jessica pulled me aside. She said, "You've been right about a lot of things. I just didn't want to admit that you could be right and I could be..." She didn't finish the sentence. Then she hugged me. When we got in the car, Max asked if we were going to do this every January. Lily said, "Or maybe next summer. Barbecue instead of roast." I looked at Megan. She was smiling. Not the polite kind, the real kind. And just like that, we were a family again. Not the one we had been pretending to be all these years, but the one that actually sat down, shared cake, and didn't need a holiday to be in the same room. Mini update. February brought something we didn't plan for. It's funny how once the ice breaks, things start moving in directions you never expect. I thought January's dinner would be it for a while. A rare moment of peace. But 2 weeks into February, I got a text from Jessica that just said, "Can I drop the boys off at your house tonight?" I replied, "Are you okay?" She didn't reply for almost an hour. Then finally, "Emergency. I'll explain later. Please." We said yes, of course. Lily and Max were thrilled. They turned it into an impromptu sleepover, pulled out sleeping bags, set up snacks, the works. Jessica showed up looking rattled, but trying to act casual. She hugged the boys goodbye and said she'd be back tomorrow. The next morning, she called. It turned out that Michael had been arrested for fraud. Something to do with his old business partner and a bunch of bad checks. Jessica had known things were shady, but not this shady. She'd spent half the night trying to get a lawyer and figure out how this would affect the boys. The twist. My dad had already heard about it through a friend at his golf club. Instead of blaming Jessica or getting defensive as usual, he went to her that morning and said, "Just tell me what you need." When she told me, her voice broke. She said, "I didn't expect him to show up like this." And that was the unexpected part. Not Michael's mess. Not the legal drama, but my father stepping in quietly without ego. Feels like everyone's rewriting themselves this year. We have reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thoughts about the stories in the comments section. Thank you and see you in the next video.